Hello, hello. How are we doing today, everyone? Welcome back. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I want to talk to you guys about the technology prophet, Marshall McLuhan, the man, the myth, the legend. Today I am very excited. We're not going to be really talking too much. I'm not going to be rambling for hours as some of the other streams. We're really going to be listening to Marshall McLuhan himself. But no scholar really had a skyrocketing prominence in the 20th century, had such important work, and then fell into really oblivion, a sort of no-name in the later half of the 20th century, yet his work began to revive with the rise of the internet. This man predicted the internet 30 years before its invention. And so Marshall McLuhan is a very, very interesting individual. We're going to be talking a lot about technology and media. I think that, recently I had watched an interview of Marshall McLuhan, and it is just so insightful that I had to share it with you guys and actually devote a stream to just this topic. So that's what we're going to be getting into. And before I start talking about him specifically or doing any housekeeping, I thought the best thing to do to begin with is actually just listen to him. So we're going to, for the first, here it is, 1965. So for 16 minutes, bear with me, we're just going to listen to Marshall McLuhan. Marshall McLuhan. Now, guys, keep this in mind. This guy is a pioneer in the field of communications. He was a major intellectual of the 20th century, as I said, most specifically of the 1960s. The interview, which I'm getting ready to show you right now, is of 1965. And he's going to be talking about media. He's going to be talking about technology. He's going to be talking about how the rise of electronic forms of communication begin to alter our sensory ratios. This began with what he called the Gutenberg Galaxy, the printing press itself, how the idea of a printing press and how it can print letters, the printed word, the printed A is the same A that's on every book that's printed. And it created sensory ratios, conceptual frameworks to then understand the Industrial Revolution, the concept of an atomized individual, how everything is irreplaceable, right? You can replaceable rather, not irreplaceable, but replaceable. You can exchange the letters in a printing press, in a printing block, the same way you can exchange workers or interchange workers in a factory. And so these are the kind of ideas that he began to connect, and we're going to get more into it here in a second, but here is Marshall McLuhan himself, and just listen to the profundity of this stuff. Just try to follow the logic, and then we'll pick up in about 16 minutes.
In a sense, you've been a historian as you've gone about your work, and let's talk first a little, if we may, about your book, The Gutenberg Galaxy, where you argue that for a long time, without actually understanding it, we've been living in a culture in which our whole way of looking at the world has been determined by typography, by the successiveness of print and so on. Would you like to enlarge on that a bit?
Well, I remember I decided to write that book when I came across a piece by J.C. Carruthers, a psychiatrist, on the African mind in health and disease, describing the effects of the printed word on the African populations. It startled me and decided me to plunge in. But we have a better opportunity in seeing our old technologies when they confront other populations elsewhere in the world. The effects they have on those people are so startling and so sudden that we have an opportunity to see what happened to us over many centuries.
Yes, which we couldn't see because we're inside the system.
Yeah.
Don't you say that what happened was that we got used to having our information processed as it is in print. That is to say, it's set out successively, whereas at the root of your thoughts, perhaps, there's the view that we can see the world as an image instantaneously, but that we've chosen, under the pressure of a technology, to set it out successively like a block of print.
Well, every technology has its own ground rules, as it were. It decides all sorts of arrangements in other spheres. The fact of script and the ability to make inventories and collect data and store data changed many social habits and processes back as early as 3000 BC. However, that's about as early as scripts began. The effects of rearranging one's experience, organizing one's experience by these new extensions of our powers, are quite unexpected. Perhaps one way of putting it is to say that writing represents a high degree of specializing of our powers.
Yes.
Compared to pre-literate societies, there is a considerable concentration on one faculty when you develop a skill like scripting.
And this is the visual, what you call a visual.
Yes,
faculty.
this is a highly specialized stress compared to anything in ordinary oral societies. There have been many studies made of this in various ways. But in our own Western world, the rise of the phonetic alphabet seems to have had much to do with Platonic culture and the ordering of experience in the terms of ideas, classifying of data and experience by ideas.
You mean that that sight has become the preeminent sense, as it was for Plato, and it went on being so in so-called civilized as opposed to primitive societies.
Increasingly so.
Till it reached the climax with the invention of printing.
Printing stepped it up to a considerable pitch, yes.
Now, how would you describe the impact of the invention of the printing press? Give us some instances of what happened as a consequence of this.
It created almost overnight. It created what we call nationalism. What in effect was a public. Our old manuscript forms were not sufficiently powerful instruments of technology to create publics in the sense that print was able to do. Unified, homogeneous reading publics. Everything that we prize in our Western world in matters of individualism, separatism, and of unique point of view, private judgment, all those factors are highly favored by the printed word and not really favored by other forms of culture, like radio, or earlier even by manuscript. But this stepping up of the fragmented, the private, the individual, the private judgment, the point of view, in fact, our whole vocabularies underwent huge change with the arrival of such technology.
Yes. Could I ask you now about the technology which, on your view, is superseding it, and which is having its own effect on our lives, comparable with, but of course entirely different in kind to the Gutenberg
technology was mechanical to an extreme degree. In fact, it originated a good deal of the later mechanical revolution, assembly line style, and the fragmentation of operations and functions as the very rationale of industrialization.
Yes.
This fragmentation had begun much earlier with after the hunter and the food gatherers with Neolithic man. I suppose in an extreme way one might say that Gutenberg was the last phase of the Neolithic revolution. Gutenberg plus the Industrial Revolution that followed was a pushing of specialism that came in with the Neolithic man. The agrarian revolution, a pushing of specialism all the way, and then suddenly we encounter the electric or electromagnetism, which seems to have a totally different principle. Is it, for some people feel, an extension of our nervous system, not an extension of merely of our bodies. If the wheel is an extension of feet and tools of hands, back, arms, the electromagnetism seems to be in its technological manifestations an extension of our nerves and becomes mainly an information system. It is above all a feedback or looped system. The peculiarity, you see, after the age of the wheel, you suddenly encounter the age of the circuit. The wheel pushed to an extreme suddenly acquires opposite characteristics. This seems to happen with a good many technologies, that if they get pushed to a very distant point, they reverse their characteristics.
What difference is the electric technology making to our interest in content, in what the medium actually says?
A very common business, I'm sure, but one of the effects of switching over to circuitry from mechanical moving parts and wheels is an enormous increase in the amount of information that is moving.
Yes.
You cannot cope with vast amounts of information in the old fragmentary classified patterns. You tend to go looking for mythic and structural forms in order to manage such complex data and moving at very high speed. So the electric engineers often speak of pattern recognition as a normal need of people processing data electrically and by computers and so on. Need for pattern recognition. It's a need which the poets foresaw a century ago in their drive back to mythic forms of organizing experience.
Well, here we are, a couple of archaic literate men, Gutenberg men, talking on the television. What is the audience getting from this? Is it listening to what we're saying, or is it feeling the impact of a new electric medium?
There is a book called "Is Anybody Listening?" It's what worries the advertising man a great deal. The idea of feedback, of being involved in one's participating in one's own audience participation, is a natural product of this circuitry.
Yeah.
Everything under electric conditions is looped. You become folded over into yourself, into your image of yourself changes completely.
In your other book, the more recent one, where you Understanding Media, where you go into all this, you use as a kind of slogan, I think, the expression, the medium is the message. Would you like to illuminate that?
I think it is more satisfactory to say that any medium, be it radio or be it wheel, tends to create a completely new human environment.
Yeah.
The human environment is, as such, tends to have a kind of invisible character about it. The unawareness of the environmental is compensated for by some attention to the content of the environment. The environment as merely a set of ground rules and as a kind of overall enveloping force gets very little recognition as a form, except from the artist. I think our arts, if you look at them in this connection, do throw quite a lot of light on environments. The artist is usually engaged in somewhat excitedly explaining to people the character of new environments and new strategies of culture necessary to cope with them. Blake is an extreme case of a man who was absolutely panicked by the kind of new environment that he saw forming around him under the auspices of Newton and Locke and industrialism. He thought it was going to smash the unity of the imaginative and sensory life all to bits. But the artist, what he was insisting upon in his own lifetime became quite a popular and widespread movement later on.
Yeah, can I return to television? Because here we are, where whoever's listening to us is also undergoing the impact of television at the moment. On your view, they're all deceiving themselves insofar as they're paying attention to what we're saying, because what's going on is a medium which is in itself the image that they ought to be concerning themselves with.
The medium of television has many characteristics which have been unheeded. Mostly it is seen under the aspect of movie form. The TV camera does not have a shutter, does not take pictures. It handles, it picks up, as radio picks up, the TV camera picks up its environment, handles it, scans it, and the effect of the TV image is iconic in the sense that it shapes things by contours rather than by little snapshots.
Now, this is one of the words that you use a good deal, iconic. I think we'd better be clear what you mean by it.
I think of it, again, to tie in with Blake, his whole insistence upon the engraved, the highly patterned and highly sculptured forms and images. The iconic in that sense is very low in visual quality, very high in tactual quality. Active touch, not cutaneous, but active touch, as the psychologists insist.
So you call television a tactile medium?
Iconic medium.
Okay.
Having much in common with the cartoon for which it is ideally suited, much more well suited than for pictures.
If you feel that we are going to have to come to terms, or we are coming to terms, much more than typographical man with this kind of instantaneous image, and I'd like now just to ask you about the distinction that you draw between different kinds of media within the electric technology. You call some, such as television, cool, and some, such as radio, hot. Now, what does this mean?
It has to do with the slang phrase, the hot and the cool, which puzzles many people. the way it's used in slang reverses the meaning of cool. Cool in the slang form has come to mean involved, deeply participative, deeply engaged. Everything that we had formerly meant by heated argument is now called cool in slang. Cool, though the idea that cool it has reversed its meaning, I think has some bearing on the fact that our culture has shifted a good deal of its stress into a demand that we be more committed, more involved in the situations in which we ordinarily work and experience.
A cool medium is one in which the definition is low and the audience has to work and supply the gaps.
Well, like a cartoon, you see, that
like
you were mentioning before. This is real cool.
Yes.
Whereas, jazz, as compared with classical music, has many of these aspects of discontinuity and very much room for fill-in.
Yes.
But where the information or data level is low, the fill-in or participation is high. If you fill the situation with complex data, the opportunity for completion fill-in is less, and participation is less.
Now, this reminds me to ask you what I think is pretty important about your work, that if you've got phases like this, which are determined technologically, one can not only speak about the kind of the state of affairs we now have, one can also, to some degree, do some prediction. Now, I think in understanding media, you sometimes write as if we got on, if we pushed on deeper into electric technology than we actually have. But you do venture some predictions about the kind of life, the kind of quality of feeling that we're going to have with the new alteration in our senses. Could you say something about that?
Well, I remember when I was here 2 years ago, after a long absence, I was quite startled at the upsurge of regional dialects in England as compared with 20 years earlier. And the relative decline of standard and homogeneous English, and the quite proud display of dialects that I had hardly heard before when I lived here. This drive in depth toward a regional depth of culture is a normal feature of electronic forms because of this circuitry that involves us deeper and deeper in ourselves. The French separatists, for example, at present time in Quebec, are very much related to this new image they have of themselves in television, a depth image.
The vision of the future that your book could leave one with is one in a big brother image, in a sense. You speak of for example, programming cultures. For instance, you say that if the South African scene looks like getting too hot because of an overdose of radio, we program a lot of television, cool them off. This kind of interference with what the typographical literate man calls human rights.
We have never stopped interfering drastically with ourselves by every technology we could latch onto. We have absolutely disrupted
and you think this might
our lives over and over again.
Lead us into a kind of electric totalitarianism?
No, I think the logic, if unimpeded, the logic of this sort of electric world is stasis.
Yes. And out of this, forgive me for interrupting again.
Yes.
I was asking, where do you see, is there a terminus, or should we always go from the thesis of typography to the...
I think if there is a logic, and a hopeful one, that appears in this, it is the dispelling of all unconscious aspects of our lives altogether, that we, in order to live with ourselves in such depth, in such instant feedback situations, we have to understand everything, so that our easygoing lolling about in the lap of the unconscious cannot endure. That we will have to take over the total human environment as an artifact. But it seems to be forced upon us. The need to become completely autonomous and aware of all the consequences of everything we're doing before the consequences occur is where we're heading.
All right. So that is just a taste, guys. What I wanted to do is kind of just introduce a few concepts related to...
One of the big flips that's taking place in our time...
Hold on.
Is the...
Pause that. Okay. So what I want to do, because I have like 4 other videos that I want to share with you guys. I have a 40-minute clip of Marshall McLuhan just taking Q&As. And the reason why I wanted to devote an entire stream of just listening to Marshall McLuhan is because of the extraordinary insights you can glean. This guy was looking at the modernization. I mean, it was already, we're mid-20th century, but being an English scholar, being a manuscript scholar, being someone so devoted to, he was a Joycean. He was a scholar of Finnegan's Wake. Again, I don't know what this means to you guys, but Finnegan's Wake is a classic of the English language, and it's often described as LSD on paper. It's one of the more difficult books to follow, and Marshall McLuhan basically was the preeminent Joycean scholar on the Finnegan's Wake. And to read his reflections on that is actually really, really interesting. But to hear Marshall McLuhan talk about media, talking about technology and where he saw it going and predicting the internet 30 years before its existence, I think is absolutely fascinating. And the fact that at the end of his career, really the mid to 1970s, because he dies in 1980, in December of 1980, the academic field, generally speaking, was not too fond of him. This is why you guys have never heard of Marshall McLuhan, yet all you have to do is go on YouTube, put in Marshall McLuhan, and you can find all these videos of him being interviewed by the BBC, by ABC, by all these different television shows in America, in Canada, and in the UK. Why? Why were they so obsessed with Marshall McLuhan? It's because these theories he developed about media, what we would call sensory ratios, right? What do your senses do? Your senses take in information. What Marshall McLuhan, and that's what I want to highlight then before we dive into his deeper discussion, his deeper lecture Q&A that I want to share with you guys. And also, guys, feel free to send in super chats or questions. Tonight's stream isn't going to be me lecturing. After I give this little section that I want to provide you guys, we're going to really be listening to much of Marshall McLuhan. But if you guys have questions, you have comments, you have super chats, send those in. We can stop the videos while we get those, so you don't have to wait till the end for the super chats. But we can make it a more interesting stream. But the point of today's stream is really to listen to Marshall McLuhan, because if you, I just went back and I was watching, the 40-minute Q&A that I was wanting to share with you is what the first thing that I watched, and I just couldn't believe the insights and how taking his theories, again, he dies in 1980, his preeminence is in the mid-1960s, to the early 1970s, and talking about the changing in our informational patterns, right? Our sensory ratios, our senses. You think of tactile senses, your olfactory, your auditorial senses. And he's saying that all of this is information processing. So he's looking then at what is the mediums in which we actually attain information, because that's going to alter our senses, because technology itself is an extension of man. That's why he was talking about the wheel is the extension of the foot. Technology is the extension of our bodies, because we live in a sort of noetic world, right? We even talked about the logismy in Orthodox theology, that much of the warfare, the spiritual warfare, actually occurs in our minds. It's in our imaginations. It's in our heads. And so is much of the world that we live in. Us being Homo sapiens sapiens, us being made in the image of God, we can extend ourselves in the world through our technology. And that is what he was interested in. So when we talk about media, and this is why there's going to be a prominent phrase you're going to hear over and over and over again in today, is that the medium is the message. The medium is the message. What this means is that he's not concerned with the content. It doesn't matter what TV program you watch. The point is, by watching television, your sensory ratios begin to be altered, that there are literally physiological effects due to whatever medium you choose to acquire information from. That could be reading books, which is different from reading manuscripts. And this is the really insightful stuff you get with Marshall McLuhan. It's like, The difference, you don't read a manuscript. The whole idea, we as contemporary people have a false information of how people acquire information. We think, oh, well, they just opened up books. They just read books, right? Books is a more contemporary phenomenon, historically speaking. People had manuscripts. What's the difference between a manuscript and a book? Well, you look at a manuscript. You don't read a manuscript. Reading is a different phenomenon. Reading is a series of guesses, of which McLuhan's going to talk about. A manuscript is handwritten, hand-drawn. There's images, there's artwork, there's words. It's not a computer. It's not a machine. It's not printed. It's written. It's drawn. It literally takes a person to do the manuscript. Therefore, the manuscript, the transmission of the information in the manuscript is so much more personalized than a book. Because a book, and you see how that changes your ratio of information, because as soon as us living in the post-Gutenberg Galaxy is what Marshall McLuhan called it, we live in a world with the printed word. And that you have to realize that the printed word itself, as he was trying to highlight in that original video that I tried to begin with, that it alters your ideas. The fact that every A, before the printed press, guys, an A was something that a hand had to write. You had to write an A, so every single A was different. Every single A that existed was different, but the printing press creates a new phenomenon. The phenomenon now, the A is the same A that's in this book, that's in that book, that's in this book, because it's all the same printing press. It's interchangeable, you see, and that creates different sensory ratios, and that begins to alter the way that we consume information and perceive ourselves. And that's what he was interested in. What are the sensorial transformations of a human being, of man, as he acquires, as he moves from a manuscript culture to a reading book culture, to a radio culture, to a television culture, and then eventually what he theorized to a more of a computer-aged culture. Well, now we're here. You know, and again, there's a lot of things that Marshall McLuhan also got wrong. You know, it's not like he was human as anybody else. But what's interesting is Marshall McLuhan was a devout Catholic. And he was a convert. He didn't grow up Catholic. In fact, he went through, as often he described, as an agnostic period. And during that agnostic period, he wasn't sure. And then he began to read the works of G.K. Chesterton, of which, check out previous streams with Existential Delight, which we go over some of the paradoxical wisdom of G.K. Chesterton. But for McLuhan, it was reading Chesterton that got him to reanalyze what he would consider Western civilization and the validity of Christianity. Again, much of the sort of paradoxical wisdom that we talked about, he saw, and he became a traditional devout Catholic. Now, I know most of you guys are Orthodox and all this stuff, but still, it's very interesting that he was a devout Christian throughout most of his life. We can disagree with much of his theology, but again, he is a brother in Christ. And so it's just so interesting when you just listen to Marshall McLuhan. And again, that's what we're going to mostly do for today's stream. There's a few things that I want to say that I didn't already ramble on. So first thing is, guys, please smash that like if you haven't. I would greatly appreciate that. Also, we'll do it real quickly. Housekeeping. Here is my link tree. Guys, hop on the Telegram. Get on the COTEL Telegram. We got so much going on over there, guys. It's so much fun. Join our group chat. It's a direct communication from me to you, so we don't have to depend on Silicon Valley. Please follow me over on Telegram. You can get that in that link tree. And also, if you guys are interested in becoming website members, I got a couple videos I got to record and throw up over there in the next couple of days. So you'll see some new educational content over on the website. Become a website member. I would greatly appreciate that. So anyways, thank you guys very much. So, okay, let's keep going. I'm so excited. I can't wait to just play these videos for you guys because they're so insightful. Okay, So Marshall McLuhan, important scholar. He's in a way considered almost the founder of the field of communication. Okay, and so like I said, he coined the term, the medium is the message. That is a big one. That's going to be a main theme for today's discussion. And he also coined the term the global village, because one of the things that he talked about is that the movement, the electrification of the planet, of the world, was actually going to move people to more primitive states. And so he called it a sort of global village, because he was not optimistic. So he's going to be very critical of these things. One of the mistakes is to assume that Marshall McLuhan was in favor of all the technology he's criticizing. He's not, actually. And in fact, towards the end of his life, he lived basically as a shepherd's-man. Like he lived a very sedimentary, rural lifestyle towards the end of his life, but he was fascinated with technology and how it works. And so he believed that this stuff was going to move man back, that he believed, and we'll even see this, a man in one of the videos I have for you guys, he questions him about the Victorian age. Well, was the Victorian age better than now? And he would say, well, certainly we are much larger, but quantity and quality are different questions. And to think that we in the contemporary period are living the most quality lifestyles is not accurate. We can live a more quantitative lifestyle. We have more. There's more people. There's more things to do. There's more things to buy. But is that in regards to the quality of culture, the quality of your sensory ratios, the quality of your experience as man to acquire information in the world? Are we, in fact, with all this technology, and I'm using the technology to talk to you now, are we, in fact, regressing in our development of our own beings? Big question, right? Because now we're looking at technology and we're in media and we're looking at it in a much more expansive way that recognizes the ways it limits us. That's what most people do not realize. So he coined the term the global village. He was born in July 21st, 1911, and he died December 31st, 1980. So he was 69 years old. And one of the saddest parts is, again, it's so wild, is how popular Marshall McLuhan was in the 1960s and how, how unpopular he was by the 80s after his death. The University of Toronto, when he was alive, one of the interesting things, the University of Toronto basically begged him to stay there because he had so many offers because of these books that he wrote on technology and these sensory ratios and the Gutenberg Galaxy and the medium is the message, that all these universities around the world wanted him. He was a professor at St. Louis University. He got his doctorate from Cambridge. He was an incredible intellect. He was considered one of the most incomprehensible men in the world, and yet all of a sudden nobody knows of him, and you guys don't know of him. I know some of you guys do, but generally speaking, Marshall McLuhan, based on the videos you guys are going to see today in the discussion, you're going to think, how the heck did I not know who Marshall McLuhan was? This guy's amazing, and I guarantee you, many of you are going to go watch more videos of him afterwards because you can't get enough of this insight, of this perspective that he had, because he was so well learned. This is what is amazing is... And I even have a clip of Terence McKenna reading a section from the Gutenberg Galaxy of Marshall McLuhan, because he was very interested in Marshall McLuhan because of such the paradoxical and insightful stuff you get from him. But everybody in the 60s wanted to hear what Marshall McLuhan had to say about anything, especially in America, guys, especially in America. And that's what's so amazing is that nobody now knows of him. And his was probably the largest public intellectual of the 1960s, at least of the earlier 1960s for sure. And there's a video, I may have to try to find it while you guys are watching another one, of him literally just sitting in a chair in the center of, basically it's like a studio or it's like a auditorium, I guess, but the stage is right in the center and there's chairs all around him. And and they have microphones, and he's just taking questions. He's just holding house. He's just sitting there. He's just spinning his chair, question over here. And it's just, you would never see a contemporary intellectual put themselves out in the public to be challenged by anybody with any question on any topic. And Marshall McLuhan did that. And it was fascinating to watch. People loved seeing it. And I guarantee you, you guys also are going to love see it when we watch more of his videos. So the interest in McLuhan really revived when the rise of the internet. So the earlier 2000s, you saw scholars actually take his scholarship back up, reread his books, begin to recite McLuhan within academia, because it turned out he was right about a lot of things, of which a lot of people, and you'll see the animosity in one video where he's surrounded by other intellectuals, they don't like his ideas. They don't like how he is so novel, how he is so interesting, how he's so eclectic. He's using so many fields to talk about the topics he wants to discuss that I think other intellectuals probably felt threatened. I mean, the guy was incredible. So, yeah, there's a few things I want to read to you guys, and then we'll just let Marshall go. And so I wanted to read his conversion to Catholicism. There's just a little section on his Wikipedia page that I thought was worth noting. And so this is Marshall McLuhan, the gentleman that we are going to listen to for the rest of this stream, on his conversion to Catholicism. And it was at the University of Manitoba. McLuhan explored his conflicted relationship with religion and turned to literature to gratify his soul's hunger for truth and beauty, later referring to the stage as agnosticism. While studying the trivium at Cambridge, this was the trivium was a sort of ancient form of education, right? He took the first steps toward his eventual conversion to Catholicism in 1937. Founded on his reading of G.K. Chesterton in 1935, he wrote to his mother, quote, had I not encountered Chesterton, I would have remained agnostic for many years at least. Chesterton did not convince me of religious faith, but he prevented my despair from becoming a habit and hardening into misanthropy. He opened my eyes to European culture and encouraged me to know it more closely. He taught me the reasons for all that in me was simply blind anger and misery. At the end of 1937, McLuhan completed what was a slow but total conversion process when he was formally received into the Catholic Church. And so the other thing that I wanted to share with you guys was some of his major work. So just go again, kind of recapping real quick some of his thought. So during his years at St. Louis University, as I mentioned, McLuhan worked concurrently on two projects: his doctoral dissertation and the manuscript that was eventually published in 1951 as a book titled "The Mechanical Bride: Folklore of Industrial Man," which included only a representative selection of the materials that McLuhan had prepared for it. McLuhan's 1942 Cambridge University doctoral dissertation surveys the history of the verbal arts, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, collectively known as the trivium, from the time of Cicero down to the time of Thomas Nash. In his later publications, McLuhan at times uses the Latin concept of the trivium to outline an orderly and systematic picture of certain periods in the history of Western culture. McLuhan suggests that the later Middle Ages, for instance, were characterized by a heavy emphasis on the study of logic. The key development that led to the Renaissance was not the discovery of ancient texts, but a shift in emphasis from the formal study of logic to rhetoric and grammar. Modern life is characterized by the re-emergence of grammar as its most salient feature, a trend McLuhan felt was exemplified by the new criticism of Richards and Levius. So at a Fordham lecture in 1999, Tom Wolfe suggested that a major under-acknowledged influence on McLuhan's work was the Jesuit philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, whose ideas anticipated those of McLuhan, or at least the scholar, suspected. As we'll find out, McLuhan was not much of a fan, especially the evolution of the human mind into what was known as the noosphere. In fact, McLuhan warns against outright dismissing and wholeheartedly accepting any of Desjardins' observations. And then this is a quote from McLuhan. He says, "This externalization of our senses creates what Desjardins calls the noosphere, or a technological brain for the world. Instead of tending towards a vast Alexandrian library, the world has become a computer, an electronic brain, exactly as an infantile piece of science fiction. And as our senses have gone outside us, Big Brother has gone inside us. So unless aware of this dynamic, we shall at once move into a phase of panic terrors, exactly befitting a small world of tribal drums, total interdependence, and superimposed coexistence." Guys, wrap your mind around that quote, okay? Like, McLuhan it's so juicy. In his private life, McLuhan wrote to his friend saying, "I am not a fan of Pierre Desjardins. The idea that anything is better because it comes latter is surely borrowed from pre-electronic technologies." Further, McLuhan noted to a Catholic collaborator, "The idea of a cosmic thrust in one direction is surely one of the lamest semantic fallacies ever bred by the word evolution. That development should have any direction at all. It is inconceivable except to the highly literate community." And so, oh my gosh, dude, the McLuhan quotes are so good. I can't get it. I got a few more of these quotes that I got to share with you guys, by the way. I talked about the Gutenberg Galaxy. This is the one where he talked about, the transition of our sensory ratios from the manuscript to the printed word. Again, the whole thing is the effect of printed word, printed letters, machines that print text, and how that totally alters and transforms society. You wouldn't think that, but it absolutely does. And once you see it, you can see the profundity. You can see that allowing this information to sort of inform your perspective is really, really useful, and something that a lot of people don't have. And so the Gutenberg Galaxy, he wrote that in 1962, or he began writing it, I guess, in 1961, published by University of Toronto Press. Again, that's where he was teaching at the time. But there's this quote from it that I wanted to share with you guys. And so throughout the book, McLuhan efforts to reveal how communication technology, alphabet writing, the printing press, the electronic media affects cognitive organization, which in turn has profound ramifications on social organization. And so this is a quote from McLuhan. "If a new technology extends one or more of our senses outside us into the social world, then new ratios among all our senses will occur in that particular culture. It is comparable to what happens when a new note is added to a melody. And when the sense ratios alter in any culture, then what had appeared lucid before may suddenly become opaque, and what had been vague or opaque will become translucent." So these sensory ratios affect what you can perceive. Now, we're not talking about the nous in the same way in regards to Orthodox anthropology, but you see how important this idea is. And so I want to talk to you then about movable type. McLuhan's episodic history takes the reader from pre-alphabetic tribal humankind to the electronic age. According to McLuhan, the invention of movable type greatly accelerated, intensified, and ultimately enabled cultural and cognitive changes that had already taken place since the invention and implementation of the alphabet, by which McLuhan means phonemic orthography. McLuhan is careful to distinguish the phonetic alphabet from logographic or logogrammic writing systems, such as Egyptian hieroglyphics or ideograms. Print culture, ushered in by the advance in printing during the middle of the 15th century when the Gutenberg press was invented, brought about the cultural predominance of the visual over the oral. An observation on the nature of the printed word from William Ivins, Prints and Visual Communication. McLuhan remarks, "In this passage, Ivins not only notes the ingraining of lineal sequential habits, but even more important, points out the visual homogenizing of experience of print culture and the relegation of auditory and other sensory complexity to the background. The technology and social effects of typography incline us to abstain from noting interplay and, as it were, formal causality, both in our inner and external lives. Print exists by virtue of the static separation of functions and fosters a mentality that gradually resists any but a separative and compartmentalized or specialist outlook. That, guys, and you can even see that in education. When you move into the printing press area, we're going to be moving then, mid-19th century, we get the Gutenberg printing press, we're going to be moving towards the Enlightenment, and that is a total transformation in the way education works, right? The goal of the trivium, the goal of the ancient person that was educated was to be a generalist, was not to be a specialist. But because of the printed word and the homogenizing of everybody's experience due to the homogenization of printed text itself, we then can't help but begin to have compartmentalized frameworks, over-rationalized frameworks, as what Max Weber actually called spheres of rationality. We have rationality that's broken, disintegrated, and we have our own reasons that exist in different parts and different aspects of our lives. It's not congruent. And that leads to a specialist outlook. And look at the university, look at our society. It's all these specialists that are totally disconnected. And so when you look at a phenomenon like the pandemic, it's so easy to fool massive amounts of people, these specialists, because they have no general foundation. People are so specialized that they can only see these limited perceptions, these perspectives that they have, that they've formed. And I think it's amazing to hear that maybe that's tied again to this idea of the printed word, right? So he also coined the term the global village, and I wanted to read a couple quotes from McLuhan regarding the global village. This is regarding the global village. The term is sometimes described as having negative connotations in the Gutenberg Galaxy, but McLuhan was interested in exploring effects, not making value judgments. But I said, you could tell that McLuhan was very pessimistic where he thought all this electronic stuff was going. He basically felt it was going to lead towards the enslavement of ourselves, because we're giving away the most human aspects of ourselves to then fill ourselves with technology, to fill ourselves with machine. And that's what he called the exteriorization of our senses and the interiorization of Big Brother. And that's exactly what we have, right? That is the institutionalized individual that I try to talk to you guys about over and over. That is the NPC. That person has totally externalized their humanity and internalized the system. That's why they're institutionalized. Anyways, this is McLuhan on the global village. Instead of tending towards a vast Alexandrian library, the world became a computer, an electronic brain. I already read that one. Okay, let me get the next one. It is not obvious that there are always enough moral problems without also taking a moral stand on technological grounds. Print is the extreme phase of alphabet culture that detribalizes or decollectivizes man in one sense. Print raises the visual features of alphabet to highest intensity of definition. Thus, print carries the individuating power of the phonetic alphabet much further than manuscript culture could ever do. Print is the technology of individualism. If men decided to modify this visual technology by an electronic technology, individualism would also be modified. To raise a moral complaint about this is like cussing a buzzsaw for lopping off fingers. But someone says, we didn't know it would happen. Yet even witlessness is not a moral issue. It is a problem, but not a moral problem. And it would be nice to clear away some of the moral fog that surrounds our technologies. It would be good for morality itself. I could keep going. So the last thing that I want to say is like hot and cold mediums. This is going to be another really important idea as we just let McLuhan run for us after this. Is hot and cold mediums is the basis of how he begins to differentiate all these forms of mediums, right? So the Gutenberg Galaxy, so the mediums in which we acquire information, technology is the extension of man and our senses. Therefore, senses are the acquisition of information. Therefore, all ways in which we acquire information, reading, radio, these are part of our senses. And so because they're new mediums of information, they alter the ratios of our senses. And so he talked about then mediums as hot and cold. And he kind of hit that in that opening video that I shared with you. But let me read this so you guys at least have this framework for all the conversation that's going to come afterwards. In this first part of understanding media, McLuhan states that different media invite different degrees of participation on the part of a person who chooses to consume the medium. A cool medium incorporates increased involvement but decreased description, while a hot medium is the opposite, decreasing involvement and increasing description. Okay, this is why he talks about newspapers being a hot medium. A newspaper is a hot medium because it doesn't engross you as an individual. You can open up the paper, you can read the newspaper, and it can tell you all the information. It can tell you a lot of information about whatever happened, right there. Whereas the television is going to be less descriptive and more involving as a medium. And so that would be a cool medium as opposed to a newspaper or a radio being a hot medium. And so, in other words, a society that appears to be actively participating in the streaming of content but not considering the effects of the tool is not allowing an extension of ourselves. A movie is thus said to be high definition, demanding a viewer's attention, while a comic book to be low definition, requiring much more conscious participation by the reader to extract value. Any hot medium allows less participation than a cool one, as a lecture makes for less participation than a seminar, and a book for less than a dialogue. So you see this, right? A hot medium has less participation, higher descriptive value. A cool medium has more participation, less descriptive value, okay? And so television's cool medium, radio, reading, hot mediums. Some media, such as movies, are hot. That is, they enhance one single sense, in this case, vision, right? So a hot medium, it focuses on one sense. Television focuses on many senses. That's why it's more engrossing but less descriptive. A hot medium uses just one sense. Radio just uses your ears, right? That's a hot medium. They enhance one single sense. In this case, vision, in such a manner that a person does not need to exert much effort in filling in the details of a movie image. Hot mediums usually, but not always, provide complete involvement without considerable stimulus. For example, print occupies visual space, uses visual senses, but can immerse its reader. A hot media favor analytical precision, quantitative analysis, and sequential ordering, as are usually sequential, linear, and logical. They emphasize one sense, for example, the sight or sound, over the others. For this reason, a hot media also include silent films, radio, the lecture, and photography. These are hot mediums. You see how they use one sense and that's it, but it's using that medium to its fullest extent. You see what I'm saying? Whereas the cool medium is maybe just partially using multiple. So this idea is really important. McLuhan contrasts hot and cool media, specifically television, which he claims requires more effort on the part of the viewer to determine meaning, and comics, which due to their minimal presentation of visual detail require a high degree of effort to fill in the details that the cartoonist may have intended to portray. Cool media are usually, but not always, those that provide little involvement with substantial stimulus. They require more active participation on the part of the user, including the perception of abstract patterning and stimulus comprehension of all parts. Therefore, in addition to television, cool media include the seminar and cartoons. McLuhan describes the cool media of emerging from jazz, popular music as a cool form of music. And the concept appears to force media into binary categories. However, McLuhan's hot and cool exist on a continuum. They are more correctly measured on a scale rather than a dichotomous terminology. So that is basically, I just wanted to get that out of the way, guys. Now we can jump into some Marshall McLuhan. You guys are going to love it. Oh, looks like we got a super chat. Let me... Oh, Jimmy throws in $5. He said, God bless everyone watching this stream. God bless everyone watching this stream. And God bless you, Jimmy. Thank you so much, brother. If you guys feel like you want to contribute, you got a question, you got a super chat, feel free to send one here at Streamlabs. So, there. Okay, now we're going to... let's see. What's the first one I want to show you guys? Let me see here. So I think the first one I want to get into is... there was one actually on... he was talking about children. Here it is. I want to show you guys this one first, actually. This is really good. I think you guys are going to like this. So this is later. This is 1977, and most of the other ones are going to be 1960s. But you guys are going to love this. He's talking about, due to the technology in 1977, how children by the age of 3 are already dramatically being affected in regards to their sensory ratios. Now check it out.
Well, as somebody once said, children now become gray at 3. They have acquired so much information about the world by the age of 3 that they're in a sense senile. And this vast amount of data that they are fed daily by TV upsets their attention span, for example. One of the effects of TV is to shorten the amount of time that people can pay attention to anything. And so young people today in America, for example, have very, very short attention span. They have to change the subject or whatever they're talking about very quickly. There's a new kind of humor that exists in America called the one-liner. We used to have jokes, stories, but no more, only one-liners now. And there isn't time to tell jokes in America. And nobody would be listening at the end of the joke.
There have been calls here for bans on advertising during children's programs. Do you agree with that?
This raises another great big subject. Advertising is the major art form of the 20th century. It is really a very high art form which has got misclassified as merely commercial. Children love advertising because the ads are better made than the programs. And any child spontaneously watches advertisements preferably to the program, simply because the advertisement is better made. Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
If broadcasting is such a potent medium as you've suggested, do you think broadcasters should be allowed to regulate themselves, as has been suggested in an inquiry here?
Yes, I think that's the desirable pattern instead of censorship from the outside. But what is needed is not only concern about the regulation of programs and content, but a regulation of the media themselves. Because since these forms, like press, radio, television, since these forms represent really huge extensions of our own bodies and our own nervous systems, we need a kind of ecology or equilibrium or balance among all these services. Otherwise, we get hopelessly lopsided. And what's wrong with television is the kind of effect it has on people's nervous systems. And it's not the program that is unsettling or dangerous. It is simply the complete disruption of the human nervous system by this potent drug.
You think there should actually be controls on the amount of television people can see, not exactly what they see?
And the amount that is in relation to other media like radio and press and telephone as far as that goes. But there needs to be a kind of interplay among all of the media, just as we are looking for a balance in the environment. The media are themselves a very large part of the environment, and they need to be regulated according to their kinds of effects they have on people. And the programs are very, very incidental. It doesn't much matter what shows you put on. It's the medium itself that has the big impact.
We think there could be a case then for decreasing the amount of television transmission time?
In relation to other media, like print and radio and so on, there should be a balance, a diet, yes.
You've said a lot about the effect of television on children. Just what children are getting the information from television. Is there a case for them still to go to school?
Again, the school represents a kind of organizing of interests and activities that needs an ecological balance too with the other media. The extracurricular activities of TV and radio have become so vast that I think they overbalance the school altogether. The classroom becomes a real problem, and the city itself outside the classroom now has all the answers, and the classroom no longer has anything comparable to the answers that are outside the classroom. Ivan Illich did a book about this called Deschooling, in which he argued that we should close the schools now because they're obsolete. But I think that what is needed is that the schools use their space and their time for questions and dialogue rather than just feeding out answers and just specialist data. However, that's a big subject. But there is this need for balance between the information available in the classroom and the information that the children all pick up outside the classroom. I don't think it's being manipulated, no, by advertising. To him, it's play as much as anything.
So you don't think there's a case for banning advertisements during children's programs?
I think it's a subject that needs lots of talking over, yes. It's not a simple subject. I don't think very many people have thought about advertising as a serious art form. The great folklore of the 20th century is advertising.
So insightful, right? Most people would have never, you would never think about some of those things. I loved when he was talking about this sort of, again, this is 1977, he's talking about due to the increase of technological availability of information, that really the classroom, the public classroom is obsolete. There's more answers outside the classroom than the classroom can actually offer. And so McLuhan then says, what we should do is reconceive of the classroom as a space in which children can come and ask the questions. So it's a place of questioning as a place of answering, because the answers are more readily available outside the classroom. So then creating a space where people can discuss, have dialogue, form better questions, deeper analysis, this should be the role of the classroom. And I think, again, we're in 2021 with this pandemic, and look at all the people, wanting to get their children back in school. And I don't know if you guys saw in California, there was a county that their school board basically was mocking the parents who wanted their children to go back to school. And they talked about, one of them obnoxiously said that they want their babysitters back. And unfortunately, I mean, she was really rude, leftist people that they don't want to teach. They still want to get paid, not having to work. But there is a sort of validity there, that the way that our system works is that the classroom isn't even about what is best or the betterment of education or the development of children. It is a sort of way to put children into a place because mommy and daddy have to go work, because daddy can't make as much money as he used to because of the selling of our jobs, because of globalism, because of the destruction of the nuclear family. Mommy has to go to work too. And now because mommy and daddy both have to do a 9 to 5, where does little Timmy have to go? Well, Timmy has to go to school. And so it's like school is babysitters, unfortunately, and it is obsolete, and you do get more answers outside of it. And McLuhan was saying this in 1977. It's phenomenal. Here's one that I want to. Here's one of a discussion of McLuhan just talking about television. So check this out.
There's no sequence. Everything happens at the same instant. That's acoustic. And everything happens at once. There's no continuity, there's no connection, there's no follow-through. It's just all now. And that, by the way, is the way any sport is. Sports tend to be like that. And in terms of the new lingo of the hemispheres, it's all right hemisphere. Games are all right hemisphere. And because they involve the whole man, and they are all participatory, and they're all uncertain, they're not, there's no continuity, there's just all surprise, unexpectedness, and total involvement.
Is that okay, do you think?
The hemisphere thing?
Yeah, but I mean the whole thing, no surprise, all spontaneity, no connection, just all at one time. Is that okay for people?
Well, okay, meaning is it good for people?
Yes.
We live in a world where everything is supposed to be one thing at a time, lineal, connected, logical, and goal-oriented. So obviously for that left hemisphere world, this new right hemisphere dominance is bad. We're now living in a world which pushes the right hemisphere way up, because it's an all-at-once world. The right hemisphere is an all-at-once simultaneous world. So the right hemisphere, by pushing up into dominance, is making the old left hemisphere world, which is our educational establishment, our political establishment, make it look very foolish.
What do you think is the most, I want to use the word effective, but that's not the right word, but I'm talking about television here. What has the greatest impact on audience?
From
is it
TV program.
Is television best when it covers an event like a space shot or the Olympics or a baseball game? Is it best when it tries to entertain with movies at night, when it tries to inform with news programs that have films of things that have already happened?
The advantage of coverage of sports events is they are ritualistic. The group gathered there is participating in a ritual. Now, the Olympics were even more a group ritual than the ordinary competitive event in a ball game or a single ball game, a single event, because they had a corporate meaning. It was not just a local, it was a sort of a worldwide meaning. And this is itself a ritualistic participation in a large process. Television fosters and favors a world of corporate participation in ritualistic programming. It's not really, that's what I mean when I say it's a cool medium. It's not a hot medium. A hot medium can, like a newspaper, can cover single events, very high intensity. TV is not good at covering single events. It needs a ritual, a rhythm, and a pattern. And that's why a lot of advertising on TV, you see, is too hot, too special, too fragmentary. Doesn't have that ritualistic flow. But the advertisers are aware of this, and they're doing a lot to correct that. But I think that was the great secret of a thing like the Olympics. People had the feeling of participating as a group in a great, meaningful ritual. And it didn't much matter who won. That wasn't the point. But I think TV tends to foster that type of pattern in events. Well, you might say it tends to foster patterns rather than events. I was here during the tornado or the hurricane, and I was amazed at the excitement that generated in everybody, expectancy, and that was covered so thoroughly that it dissipated the storm itself. The coverage actually got rid of the storm. I think that is one of the functions of news, to blow up a storm so big that you can dissipate it by coverage. It's a way of getting rid of the pressure by coverage. That you can actually dissipate a situation by giving it a maximal coverage. It's very disappointing from one angle, but it's survival from another.
But now don't you get into alarming people?
That's done by rumors, not by coverage. Hints, suggestions. But the big coverage merely enables people to get together and enjoy the sort of a group emotion. It's like being at a ball game, a big group emotion. But I do think that taught me that one of the mysteries of coverage is that it's a way of releasing tension and pressure.
What would happen if you could shut off television for 30 days in the entire United States of America?
It would be a kind of hangover effect, because it's a very addictive medium. And you take it away and people develop all the symptoms of a hangover. Very uncomfortable. It was tried, remember, a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, they actually paid people not to watch TV for a few months.
I don't recall that, but I'm sure
it was in Germany. It was in Germany. It was in the UK. And they discovered they had all the withdrawal symptoms of drug addicts. And very uncomfortable, all the trauma of withdrawal symptoms. The TV is a very, very involving medium, and it is a form of inner trip. And so people do miss it.
The thought just occurred to me that possibly if you turned off television, there would be a lot of people who would say at the end of the 30-day period, we will not permit you to turn it back on. Do you think that could happen?
A great many of the teenagers have stopped watching television. They're saturated. Saturation is a possibility. About the possibility of reneging on any future TV, I doubt it. I doubt that, except through saturation. But the TV thing is so demanding and therefore so soporific that it requires an enormous amount of energy to participate in. You don't have that freedom of detachment.
We're just talking about basic television programs.
Yeah. Well, one of the effects of television is to remove people's private identity. They become corporate, peer group people just by watching it. They lose interest in being individual, private individuals. And so this is one of the hidden and perhaps insidious effects of television.
Have you watched enough of Jimmy Carter during all the primaries to figure out why he has been so effective with his presentations on television?
I haven't seen a great deal, but his charisma is very simply identified. He looks like an awful lot of other people. He looks like an all-American boy. He looks like all the American boys that ever were, which is charisma. Charisma means looking like a lot of other people. If you just look like yourself, you have no charisma. So Carter has a lot of built-in charisma of that, looking like a lot of other guys. A very acceptable guys.
How helpful would you be to Mr. Carter or whomever the Republicans choose if they were to come to you and say, you know, Mr. McLuhan, we'd like to hire you for a specified fee to advise us on a political campaign?
I could tell them when they were hotting up the image too much and phasing out that charisma. The temptation of any campaign manager is to hot up the image until it alienates everybody. And they don't realize when they're doing it.
How do you know when the image is getting too hot?
Specialized. The moment it begins to specialize, it phases out the group.
What do you mean specialized?
It begins to look more and more like one guy. It begins to look more and more like Jimmy Carter and less like the rest of America.
Forgive my impertinence, but has anybody asked you why you are sometimes difficult to understand?
Because I use the right hemisphere when they're trying to use the left hemisphere.
Okay, well, simple. I'll try and get back on the line.
You see, when people ordinarily people are trained to try to follow you and to connect everything you say with what they last heard. They're not prepared to use their wits. They're only prepared to use the idea they picked up the first time and try to connect it to another idea. So if you're in a situation that is flexible, where you have to use your wits and perceptions, they can't follow you. They have preconceptions that phase them out at once. You see, that's left hemisphere. I use the right hemisphere a great deal, which is a world of perception, no concepts. I don't use any.
Got you. You don't try to connect things. You just let the right hemisphere take over and let it go.
And watch what's happening. And so that is the way the cookie crumbles, sort of thing, where you don't know what's going to happen, but you follow the crumble.
Love it, right? Oh my gosh. Okay, so I guess I have another 9-minute video of him discussing some ideas with some fellow scholars. We can watch that one. I can save it later, or we can just dive into the 40-minute Q&A that I really wanted to show you guys. Really doesn't matter. I guess we'll just dive into him talking about the end of polite society. And so in this video, McLuhan is talking about polite society and how, again, that the sense ratio of what I've called a more formal society, the way we speak, the way we dress, the way we encounter in each other, the morality, the social morality of society. I talked about how there was like a more formal period, right? Well, Marshall McLuhan at the end of this video, because he's going to be going back and forth with an English scholar for the first half, that the second half, he is talking about how the sense ratios of the printed word allowed basically for a more formalized society, the Victorian age and stuff like that. But polite society as we know it is actually going to go away. Again, this is in 1968, I think, that this particular discussion was. So in 1968, he's saying that due to the rise of electronic mediums and this going to become the predominant way information is going to be transferred, it's going to change the polity of society. That polite society, or whatever that concept means, will no longer exist. And that is so true now. It is so true now, but here is him going back and forth with a few different intellectuals. Check it out.
For heaven's sake, this present time we're moving into, this electric age, is the dawn of much the greatest of all human ages. There's nothing to even remotely resemble the scope of human awareness and human greatness.
There we are, a value judgment.
Yeah, I don't know. This is quantity, Marshall. Most people make their judgments in terms of quantity. Now, I'm merely saying quantitatively, this is by far the greatest human age. What further evaluations would you wish to have brought to bear?
Well, I thought when you said greatest, you meant finest. That is, it would be more admirable than Renaissance, Florence, or something.
Do you mean biggest? Yes, we're 1,000 times greater than the Victorian age.
In size?
In size.
But not in quality?
I don't know.
You don't know?
We may not, there might be some way. I mean, let's say if there's a good Lord, it's possible he might measure these epochs by how a handful of air appeals to him. In other words, he might take a handful of air out of one epoch and say, marvelous air. Yeah. He might take it out of our air and say, automobile exhaust.
Contrary to what Marshall has so brilliantly suggested in all his writing, I think there are absolute standards in this thing, culture, in art and literature, and that these standards you can measure one age against another, and that we happen to have lived, no great misfortune really, we happen to have lived in what amounts to a dark ages.
We're a highly integral civilization, and this is what distresses people who belong to the old specialist, disintegrated one. They can't find a little place for themselves.
Yes, but are you sure, you see, are you absolutely sure that this is the birth struggle of a new civilization? Oh, yeah. Are you absolutely sure that it's not just the breakup?
No,
not just the breakup. See, that's what I think is perhaps the whole difference between North America and Europe, really, is that you over here do believe that. But you do over here.
You have a bigger stake in the old technology.
Well, no, but we're inclined to think that all these things that you imagine to be of such enormous importance, like, for instance, this thing we're doing now on television, because a lot of people goop at television for hours every day, you're inclined to think that's an enormously important thing. And I just think it's a sort of sign of the kind of vacuity that comes when a civilization breaks, like the circuses in Rome. If it had been a Marshall McLuhan, then, you see, Caius Marcius McLuhanibus, he would have written a great book about the circuses, and he'd have said, here's this new civilization coming.
There's no medium.
No, they had no new technology. But Caesar, by the way, educated the Gauls by war. This is the approved Western method of educating backward Aryans, is warfare. And Alexander the Great did it that way. Napoleon, I was reading a book on the Russian Revolution the other day in which the author was explaining enthusiastically that the great forward thrust in Russian institutions came from the Napoleonic invasions and then from the Crimean War. What is happening in the Vietnam now is a great educational forward thrust from us on the war front, on the war path.
It's very pleasant to think of it that way.
I think it's a horribly, it's like roast pig. You know what Charles Lamb's theory of roast pig? You like roast pig? Burn your house down.
Burn your house down. Well, that's how we do it. Yes, and this is why I'm a bit inclined to agree with you. But I don't think it's done consciously. I think that's just because
Oh, no, we never do anything consciously.
No.
But would you say that this North American society is basically optimistic still?
Yes,
and
I would.
European is basically pessimistic?
In a very general term, I would. I mean, the thing is that because I think, and here I'm rather sticking my neck out, but I'm going to say this, and Marshall may disagree with me very strongly, but I'm going to say this, that you over here do believe that the environment that men create governs their nature and their lives. And I don't believe in that. I think that this is only a very small part.
We are of 18th century origin, and it was precisely at that time that Rousseau invented the theory that the environment was the creator.
That's right, and a load of rubbish it was. Absolute rubbish.
However,
which has produced the present chaotic
nature
situation.
as a teaching machine is now capable of being programmed by human intention.
Yes, but you see, these, in a way, Marshall, that's only just words, isn't it? No. I mean, you program it like men, you mean like men program computers. You mean they put in something and then the computer, but you see, that's a non-creative
It's like programming lighting levels, sound levels, temperature levels.
Yeah, but is this a pleasant idea?
Life.
This is an idea to be welcomed.
This is, well, whether it's welcome or not, my great point that I'm trying to make is that is not life, that's a surface thing, you see. And I think that life's about something much more than that.
It's like saying, though, isn't it, that disease is not just a matter of symptoms. On the other hand, if you can get rid of all the symptoms, who cares what disease you have?
But the fact is, the simple fact is, taking that analogy, is that treating the symptoms does not cure the disease.
No, but getting rid of the symptoms does.
Wouldn't have completely. Very often, if you just treat a symptom and get rid of it, you get another.
What do you think about the young people who are in this hippie thing? You're one of their favorite people. Are they among your favorite people?
Well, I can't say that I have given them too much cause for comfort, or I haven't done very much beside just observe what sort of form their behavior seems to indicate is behind their life. And I can see clearly that they're desirous of a very much more rich social life, involvement in social life. And the mere finding of little niches and jobs and so on will not satisfy them.
Aren't they becoming tribalized? The way you say the whole world is, and they are actually doing it.
Tribal,
and they even use the word, don't they?
I don't know, but tribal is not a new form exactly. But post-literate tribal is a very different matter from pre-literate tribal. And we're tribalizing simply by virtue of a much closer family, a sense of the human family.
In this part of the world, you are inclined to say, now, as Marshall does, 200 years ago, printing was invented. Then,
500.
500 years ago, printing was invented. Life's never been the same since then.
No, absolutely true.
I don't agree with that. I think that printing or television, all these things, they affect the surface of man. But the fascination of life, to me, is the exact opposite that I find in Socrates and St. Augustine and St. Paul, all those people who lived before printing.
But not before writing.
Oh, well, if you like.
By the way, there's a wonderful book by Eric Havelock called Preface to Plato, in which he just mentions in passing that what Socrates' great contribution was to the dialectic was the ability to say, would you mind repeating that, please? The Socratic irony, the Socratic questioning was a playback. With the coming of writing, the possibility of playback came into human society for the first time. Socrates was very much a product of technology, new technology.
Well, I wouldn't dispute that, Marshall. I wouldn't presume to dispute it. But what I would say is that if you, as far as I've been able in a very sort of amateur way, to read and think about the various contributions to knowledge which have been produced at different times, the thing that astonishes me about them is the huge area which is the same, which is constant, and how narrow is the area that belongs to particular environmental changes, whether a civilization is in a very stable or advanced state, or whether it's in a chaotic state. There are two questions that you can ask about life, really. You can ask the question how, and you can ask the question why. Now, I'm passionately interested in the question why,
Yeah.
And I'm not much interested in the question
But
how.
what
because
about
I regard it as true, but I think you're here enormously interested in the question how.
Remember the phrase polite society when that came in? This historically meant a society that established its values on the word or the behavior that was capable of inspection, that would bear looking at. And polite society no longer is with us because we no longer live in a visual culture. And so the values of polite society are for the birds. And I'm not free of the nostalgic look back at some of those old values. On the other hand, I can see why they've gone down the drain, and I can see why new ones are forming right under our noses, and I can see why the new ones create such revulsion, total recoil.
All right. So that was the sort of discussion with some fellow intellectuals. I saw that you guys really enjoyed that British accent. There's another video I wanted to share with you guys of McLuhan actually predicting the internet. I guess we can do that because that's only a 5-minute clip. So we can watch that one real quick. And I really want to dive into this Q&A too. I love this Q&A. In fact, it's the Q&A that got me so interested in actually doing today's stream. So let me pull that up. So here is what we're getting ready to watch now is McLuhan actually predicting the internet in 1966.
You've been writing about the mass media for a good many years, and now you're an object of the mass media. How has this changed your view of it, if at all?
Well, let me instead explain why this has happened. Because, you see, suddenly, if you've noticed, the mood of North America has changed very drastically. Things like the safety car couldn't have happened 10 years ago.
Why is that?
Now, it's because people have suddenly become obsessed with consequences of things. They used to be obsessed with mere products and packages and launching these things out into markets and into the public. Now they've suddenly become concerned about what happens when these things go out on the highway. What happens when this kind of program gets on the air? What happens? They want safety air, safety cigarettes, safety cars, and safety programming. This need for safety is a sudden awareness that things have effects. Now, my writing has for years been concerned with the effects of things, not their impact, but their consequences after impact. TV, unlike the fantasy world, the escape world of the movies, TV creates enormously serious and realistic-minded sort of person, well, almost oriental in his inward meditativeness. I think
this is the teenager of today.
Yes, he's becoming almost oriental in his inwardness.
He's so thoughtful and serious.
Yeah, grim. Whereas the movie generations of the 20s and 30s were a coon-coated bunch of superficial types, had a good time, and went to college, but not for knowledge and that sort of thing. All has changed.
And changed because of television, because
very much. Television gave the old electric circuitry that is already here, gave it a huge extra push in this direction of involvement and inwardness. You see, the circuit doesn't simply push things out for inspection. It pushes you in to the circuit. It involves you. When you put a new medium into a play in a given population, all their sensory life shifts a bit. Sometimes shifts a lot. This changes their outlook, their attitudes, changes their feelings about studies, about school, about politics. Since TV, both Canadian and British and American politics have cooled off almost to the point of rigor mortis. Our politics require much more hotting up than the TV medium will give them. TV is ideal, you see, when you've got two experts like ourselves discussing TV. This is good TV because there's a process going on of mutual challenge, discovery, and processing. Now, TV is good for that, and same with ads. If the audience can become involved in the actual process of making the ad, then it's happy. It's like the old quiz shows. They were great TV because it gave the audience a role, something to do. they were horrified when they discovered they'd really been left out all the time because the shows are rigged. Now, this was a horrible misunderstanding of TV on the part of the programmers. But in the same way, most advertisers do not understand TV media. Do you know that most people read ads about things they already own? They don't read things to buy them, but to feel reassured that they have already bought the right thing. In other words, they get huge information satisfaction from ads, far more than they do from the product itself. Where advertising is heading is quite simply into a world where the ad will become a substitute for the product, and all the satisfactions will be derived informationally from the ad, and the product will be merely a number in some file somewhere. Instead of going out and buying a package book, of which there have been 5,000 copies printed, you will go to the telephone, describe your interests, your needs, your problems, and say, I'm working now on the history of Egyptian arithmetic, I know a bit of Sanskrit, I'm qualified in German, and I am a good mathematician. They said, it'll be right over. And they at once Xerox, with the help of computers from the libraries of the world, all the latest material just for you personally, not as something to be put out on the bookshelf. They send you the package as a direct personal service. This is where we're heading under electronic information conditions. Products increasingly are becoming services.
What kind of a world would you rather live in? Is there a period in the past or a possible period in the future you'd rather be in?
I'd rather be in any period at all, as long as people are going to leave it alone for a while. Just let go. Just leave it now.
But they're not going to, are they?
No. So the only alternative is to understand everything that's going on and then neutralize it as much as possible, turn off as many buttons as you can, and frustrate them as much as you can. I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening, because I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me. Now, many people seem to think that if you talk about something recent, you're in favor of it. The exact opposite is true in my case. Anything I talk about is almost certainly to be something I'm resolutely against. And it seems to me the best way of opposing it is to understand it, and then you know where to turn off the button.
Oh my gosh, it's so amazing, right? You guys can't get enough of Marshall McLuhan. It's so insightful. It's incredible.
Is essentially the form of the quest for...
Oh my gosh. Okay. As I promised, we'll now get into the 40-minute Q&A that I want to show you guys. There was one clip that I saw. I think he mentions it in the Q&A, but I loved it. And he was talking about how violence is the quest for identity, and there must be a necessary space for violence to occur for men to maturate in terms of their full identity. And then he goes fuller into this idea. It's so interesting. But now we will just dive into. Before we would do that, I do want to highlight a super chat that we got from the great Pano. Fellow Hoosier and Ortho Bro says, I always find the connection between the beatific vision and television to be extremely daunting. Could TV/smartphones be Satan's fulfillment of that old schematic doctrine? We're staring directly into the essence of God, globalist propaganda. Certainly a probability there. I look at technology, though, myself, because I do love the insights that McLuhan offers us in regards to technology. I myself don't view it, and as he just highlighted in that last video, much of his theories are not that he's in favor of these things, is that he is trying to create a comprehensive critical analysis of technology and media itself. But I don't see technology in and of itself as evil. I do see it as a tool, and so I don't see what we're doing right now in this live stream on YouTube as a stretch from a wheel and a wheelbarrow. Now, of course, the sensory ratios absolutely are different, and they alter those ratios within us differently. But technology itself, whether it's a hammer, whether it's a wheel, whether it's a computer, it's all technology. It's an extension of man himself. But I see technology as the gateway for evil because it is only of this world. You see, man being made in the image of God is in this world, but totally not totally of this world. We're totally created, but we're not totally of this world with the givenness of our soul. But if Satan controls this realm, if we are in a fallen creation, and if that is the case, well, then it'd be through fallen means. It would be through robotics. It'd be through technology. It'd be through electricity. It'd be through technology that Satan would then entrap the world. And so when McLuhan talks about the externalization of the person through much of these technologies, I can't help, as somebody mentioned in the chat, and I had already thought this, of the destruction of one's personhood. That what these technologies do, as we talked about with the institutionalized individual, is the externalization of all that is actually human in them, and with the infiltration of the institution of the big brother. And so technology then I see as the gateway, the transhumanism, how, any of the sort of dystopian fantasies that I think are ultimately rooted within a satanic worldview are because machines aren't man. It's like Satan can get away with controlling the planet. All he needs is a few, like he doesn't care if he destroys, there's 8 billion people. If he got rid of 7 billion people, that if he got down to 100 million people, it doesn't matter. It's the damnation of the souls of those people. If he controls the world through robots, why would that matter? Because for him, robots themselves are made in his image. Robots are made in the image of fallen creation. Robots aren't made in the image of God. Robots aren't transcendent. Robots aren't actual sentient. They don't have a soul. And so when you see the culture move towards the obsession of robots and transhumanism, you see it as the obsession with the devoidance of actual humanity, with the devoidance of actual personhood. And so it's sad. It's a culture moving towards death. I mean, McLuhan would actually be horrified by this stuff, right? Just because he sees ultimately this stuff as a depersoning, as creating what he called the global village, because it's homogenizing everything. Everything in our world is becoming homogenized, including people themselves. That's what the problem was, because they're externalizing their true personhood or individuality. You want to use that term, and so they're interiorizing then the world, the homogenization process itself, right? And so that's why I see technology as certainly have negative, consequential, demonic, satanic elements, but also why I'm not on a mountain praying and instead streaming right now through all the technology that, in fact, we're criticizing and looking at how it alters our sense ratio. So with that being said, now let's get into this great Q&A, guys. You guys are going to love this 40-minute Q&A with Marshall McLuhan in this audience. So here we go, without further ado. Also, guys, smash that like if you haven't, and feel free to throw in shoot a super chat or question or anything like that. Use the Streamlabs link. Thank you.
Forgive my impertinence, but has anybody asked you why you are sometimes difficult to understand?
Because I use the right hemisphere when they're trying to use the left hemisphere.
Okay, well,
simple.
I'll try and get back on the left.
You see that when the people ordinarily people are trained to try to follow you and to connect everything you say with what they last heard. They're not prepared to use their wits. They're only prepared to use the idea they picked up the first time and try to connect it to another idea.
Television is cool and radio is hot. That's the message, and the medium is Marshall McLuhan. Good evening, and welcome to Monday Conference, which has often been said to be not so hot. When future historians look back on the 20th century, it's almost certain that one of the statements from this era, which they will treasure for posterity, is the medium is the message. Like most of Marshall McLuhan's statements, it's pithy, apparently simple, and provocative to the point of being outrageous. Another of his propositions is that some media are cool and some are hot. Marshall McLuhan studies the media as a way of understanding what it is that makes us live in the way we do. as a way of understanding society itself. He's concerned with all media, but he's best known for his work on the electronic media, particularly radio and television. He sees them as the extension of our central nervous system and argues that they're leading to an electrical re-tribalisation of the West. If there is a Mr. Electric of the 20th century, it's Marshall McLuhan. More formally, he's Professor of English in the University of Toronto, Canada, and Director of the Centre for Culture and Technology there. Among Professor McLuhan's books are The Mechanical Bride, War and Peace in the Global Village, and of course, Understanding Media, The Extensions of Man. Marshall McLuhan has been brought to Australia by the Sydney radio station 2SM to address a seminar on the commercial, broadcasting and music industries. Earlier tonight, Professor McLuhan gave his address, and now he's ready for questions from the audience with us, made up of the participants in the seminar and members of the general public. Well, Professor McLuhan, I think we better deal with the medium as the message before it does go into the 21st century. When you say the medium is the message, does that leave any room at all for criticism of individual, say, television programs?
Or content.
Yes.
You see, it doesn't much matter what you say on the telephone. The telephone as a service is a huge environment, and that is the medium. And the environment affects everybody. What you say on the telephone affects very few. And the same with radio or any other medium. What you print is nothing compared to the effect of the printed word. The printed word sets up a paradigm, a structure of awareness which affects everybody in very, very drastic ways, and it doesn't very much matter what you print as long as you go on with that form of activity.
You've said that television promotes illiteracy. I'm wondering whether you think that's a bad thing.
I don't think it promotes illiteracy. I think it creates another form of awareness. Literacy had very strange antecedents, very strange effects on people, and we're only beginning to notice what those effects were now that it tends to be pushed aside. The literacy as a form of awareness is a highly specialist and objective sort of thing. You can stand back, and the literate man can stand back objectively and look at situations. The TV person has no objectivity at all.
But does television, say, promote illiteracy, or doesn't it?
It tends to create a totally different kind of awareness, which is rather that of involvement. Literacy is objective. TV is subjective, totally involving.
In fact, do people who watch a lot of television or listen to a lot of radio, say, do they read more or read less? Or do?
I think radio people are far more literate than TV people. But this is complementarity of the media. But I personally have avoided making value judgments because I've long ago discovered that value judgments are so personal that it confuses people enormously.
Yes, but that is a kind of value judgment in itself, isn't it?
Not of a medium, but of people. And people are very diversified. It's been known for a long time that a reader, for example, the word read, to read, means to guess. Look it up in the big dictionary. The word redan means to guess, and reading is actually an activity of rapid guessing. Because any word has so many meanings, including the word reading, many, many meanings, that to select one in a context of other words requires very rapid guessing. That's why a good reader tends to be a very quick decision maker. And a good reader, a highly literate person, tends to be a good executive, because he has to make decisions very fast while reading. And so the very nature of reading calls for quick decisions and guessing. And that's what the word means, to guess, to read down.
One last point from me. You've said that advertising is the folk art of the 20th century. In what sense is it an art?
I think it is a very great art form. It's not a private art form, it's corporate. But it is the concern of the advertiser is to make an effect. Any painter, or any artist, any musician sets out to create an effect. He sets a trap to catch somebody's attention. Any painter, any poet, any musician sets a trap for your attention. That is the nature of art.
Do you think there are any masterpieces of advertising or radio or television in the sense that there are
We'll know better in, what, 50 years?
What's your guess now?
I know that there are. On the other hand, the ones we might select now as the great ads of the year would probably not get the same vote 50 years from now. But do you remember now, Mr. Shakespeare wrote plays that were considered very vulgar and popular entertainment in his own day. And nobody had any criteria for measuring his greatness at that time. He was a popular artist. And TV is a popular folk art. And we have no criteria for measuring it. The measurements that we do use are just the results, bottom line. How many sales resulted from this particular ad? But that's box office.
Thank you. Now, someone from the audience, please. Yes.
If the medium is the message, and it doesn't matter what we say on TV, why are we all here tonight? And why am I asking this question?
I didn't say it didn't matter what you asked on TV. I said that the effect of TV, the message of TV, is quite independent of the program. That is, there is a huge technology involved in TV which surrounds you physically. And the effect of that huge service environment on you personally is vast. The effect of the program is incidental.
Please, would you show your undoubted enthusiasm by having your hands up? It really does make it much easier if I can see them. Sorry to be... Yes.
Professor McLuhan, those of us who are McLuhan students know how clearly you define a problem for us. We also know that very often you point to an answer too. Earlier in your talk this evening, you spoke about the search for identity through violence. I think we'd all agree now if we ever could afford violence, we can, as weaponry becomes more efficient, we can no longer corporately, afford violence. So what do you suggest as alternatives that we offer instead of the search for identity through violence?
Dialogue. The alternative to violence is dialogue, which is a kind of encounter interface with other people and situations. But yes, we live in a world in which we have so much power. In the old days, you could pull a trigger on a revolver and hurt people. But today, when you trigger these vast media that we use, you are manipulating entire populations. And the kinds of violence that we can now exert collectively are such as to require the situation to cool to right down, cool, cool, cool. And we have, by means of the overkill, we have created a kind of universal peace in the world. The means of destruction are so vast at our command that war becomes unthinkable. So, in the same way, people are cooled off by media and by situations which require dialogue rather than just self-expression. Violence is a kind of self-expression. And so that the quest for identity, the person who is struggling to find out who am I, by all sorts of maladjustments, all sorts of quarrels, all sorts of encounters, such a person is a social nuisance, of course. But the quest for identity goes along with this bumping into other people in order to find out who am I, how much power can I exert, how much identity can I discover that I possess by simply banging into other people. And So that's what I had in mind when I said that the quest for identity is always a violent quest. It's a series of adventures and encounters that create all sorts of disturbance. I suppose, I don't think you have to go very far in literature for examples of it. I suppose Don Quixote is a great popular hero, and Flash Gordon, and Superman. But we're now beginning to get I'm thinking now of this new show, the Star War, that is the new Hollywood thing, that is based on Flash Gordon comics. The bionic man, bionic woman, these are vicarious forms of violence in which young people are trying to discover, who am I? I once asked to my granddaughter, one of our granddaughters, who was then 6, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she said instantly, bionic woman. This is a kind of violence that permits one to discover who you are. I was using violence in a rather large sense of simply encounter, abrasive encounters.
Yes.
In terms of the figure ground thesis that you put forward in City's classroom, Professor, in what way would the message that you've given us tonight be different if this meeting, instead of being here in the Sydney Hilton Hotel, were, say, in the centre of the Sydney Cricket Ground?
Well, cricket is a very organised form of violence. I would insist on studying the game of cricket as a manifestation of the controlled forms of violence in the community. Baseball or football, any kind of sport, is a dramatization of the typical and accepted forms of violence in the business community. And so you can learn an enormous amount about the business community by studying the rules and procedures in cricket or baseball or golf, as far as that goes. All these games are huge ways of discovering, dramatizing what the society you're in is all about. By the way, without an audience, these games would have no meaning at all. They have to be played in front of a public in order to acquire their meaning. A baseball game without an audience would be a rehearsal only, a practice. The game requires a public, and the public has to resemble a whole cross-section of the community. I'm very interested in games as dramatizings of violent behavior under control.
Professor McLuhan, seeing you know so much about cricket, the problem is where to put the commercials, apparently, when you broadcast cricket. There's nowhere to put them. Does this mean the game has to change to fit television, or...?
I have been paying attention to cricket in the last few days while I've been here, but it's a game that I did not grow up with. So I'm not
so you can't answer the question.
Well, I'm not sure, but you say where to put the commercials.
Yes, they're in for them, anywhere.
You mean that it is so continuous?
Seamless garment.
I see.
Yes.
It is a seamless web.
We normally put them as the bit where all the theology of the game comes across and all the inner thoughts. There was a woman, yes, back, thanks. Would the people right at the back please come to that centre microphone? In the meantime, over here, yes.
Quite some time ago, you said that life was very much like driving a car, but only being able to look into the rear vision mirror. After you've gone, who's going to drive the bus?
I made a strange discovery about the rearview mirror, having accused a lot of people of living in the rearview mirror, and having meant by that that they were out of date, that they were 19th century minds. I then took another look into the rearview mirror on my own. I was not criticized. I did this on my own. And I discovered, somewhat to my surprise, that when you look in the rearview mirror, you do not see what has gone past. You see what is coming. And the rearview mirror is the foreseeable future. It is not the past at all. The title, the phrase rearview mirror, appears to distort the situation. Most people think of it instinctively from the sound of the phrase, it must be the past. In terms of media, of course, the thing that is occupying the foreground in terms of the rearview mirror is nostalgia. Nostalgia is the name of the game in every part of our world today, including the program Roots. But nostalgia is not, well, it's a kind of rearview mirror if you like, but it's also the shape of things to come. When people have been stripped of their private identities, they develop huge nostalgia. And nostalgia for the jeans and Levi's of the young today are nostalgia for granddad's overalls. His work clothes have now become the latest costume. But this is a rather mysterious thing. The costumes worn by the young, the fashionable costumes, are really very old hat and nostalgic. And someone called it international motley. That the costumes worn by the young today are a kind of international motley or clown costume. And paradoxically, the clown is a person with a grievance. His role in medieval society was to be the voice of grievance. The clown's job was to tell the emperor or tell the royalty exactly what was wrong with the society. He often lost his head in the process. But the clown, the international motley of our time, the clown is trying to tell us his grievance. The beards and the hairdos and the costumes of the young are a manifestation of grievance and anger. You've heard about the streakers, a kind of manifestation of anger about the lack of jobs and goals in our world. In America, we call them passing fannies, but I understand it has a different meaning here.
It's more restrictive, yes. Yes.
Professor, I'm asking this question, which I think is very relevant for people today who are looking for an identity, who are searching for a kind of responsible attitude towards the media. Since in the 20th century we're so conditioned, hemmed in by the media, should we be teaching our children what value judgments they should really make concerning different programs they should watch on TV or different programs they should listen on the radio as part of their development of achieving adult maturity?
Answer is yes. But one of the peculiarities of electric speed is that it pushes all the unconscious factors up into consciousness. This began with Freud and Einstein back in 1900. But the hidden aspects of the media are the things that should be taught, because they have an irresistible force when invisible. When these factors remain ignored and invisible, they have an absolute power over the user. So, yes, the sooner that the population, or the young or old, can be taught the effects of these forms, the sooner we can have some sort of reasonable ecology among the media themselves. What is desperately needed is a kind of understanding of the media which would permit us to program the whole environment so that, say, literate values would not be wiped out by new media. If you understand the nature of these forms, you can neutralize some of their adverse effects and foster some of their beneficent effects. This, we have never reached this level of awareness.
We can never reach that level of awareness
I have been working for that for a long time. You may be surprised to hear that the Finnegan's Wake of Mr. James Joyce is one of the top guides to the effects of media. The work is entirely devoted to that theme. And the thunders in Finnegan's Wake are statements of the effects of particular media. The last thunder in Finnegan's Wake on page 424 is television. And with all its effects, social consequences carefully dramatized. Finnegan's Wake is a drama, it's a play. And the actors in the play are the media themselves. Very few Joyceans know this.
In the fourth row, yes.
Professor McLuhan, up till now, while television may have dominated our minds and our lives, the actual box in the corner hasn't dominated our living room. But large screen television sets are being developed, screens, say, the size of a living room wall. What effect do you think that will have? Will we tolerate giants watching us?
It's a, I think, very important thing to keep in mind, very important question. I am not, personally, I haven't seen those big screens. They tend to have them out on the playgrounds or the playfields in America. They tend to have these great big screens for the game itself so that you can watch the game on television while the game is in process. This is a kind of situation that I think it invites an enormous awareness of actual process to participate in the kind of replay of the thing while it is still ongoing. Participation in replay is a form of pattern recognition that is new in the media and has, I'd say, rather large consequences, mostly cognitive, mostly consequences that will affect our nature of our cognition and awareness, and I would think entirely in the direction of extreme self-awareness. I once asked a famous quarterback in American football on television, once asked him what the effect of the instant replay had been on the game of football. And he said, we have now to play the game in such a way that the audience can watch the actual process that we're performing. They're not any longer interested just in the effect of the play. They want to see the nature of the play. So they've had to open up the play on the field to enable the audience to participate more fully in the process of football play. It's an unexpected effect. I think it would be an effect that would extend also to our educational world, to the classroom. That the future of education requires that we pay much attention to the media we're employing as forms of study. Not necessarily, not necessarily the hardware, merely the hardware skill in the use of cameras and of microphones, but awareness of the nature of the operation.
When you said that television uses the eye as an ear, what did you mean by that?
It is a phrase of Tony Schwartz in a very interesting book called The Responsive Chord. What he means literally is that the image is constituted by millions of these resonating particles. There are no pictures on television. There are no snapshots. There's no shutter. There's no camera. There is an outpouring of these small bits of information in patterns that are entirely active and dynamic. So they resonate. So he was really saying that the television image is primarily not a visual but resonating form of experience.
Yes, with the glasses. No, behind you, sorry, I had to call. No, all right, I'm sorry, you go ahead then. Too late.
Professor McLuhan, is television the ultimate medium, or is there worse to come?
You've heard of the hologram? The hologram goes completely around you. Television only goes a little bit around you. The hologram is 360 degrees. but it's been anticipated by these the rock music, in which you have to become just enclosed in a sound bubble. The hologram does for TV what rock does for auditory entertainment. But the hologram is technically here.
Yes, in the front row.
Professor McLuhan, earlier you spoke about us as going out rather for our privacy and coming home for the social aspect. I'd like to hear you comment on that in relation to electronic man's new thirst for meditation, contemplation, mystical experience.
We're being asked about the relation of this inside-outside on the life of meditation. Well, as you know, the transcendental meditation has become exceedingly popular. All forms of mystic meditation have become very popular in our television age. The East, we have gone very far to the East since television. Just as an exercise in awareness and so on, meditation has come in very big since television. I'm not sure that that is good or bad at all. It just has happened. And do you think of it as a very significant event?
I think of it as very significant, yes. It seems to me almost like a nostalgia for a return to that private self without going outdoors to find it. Mm-hmm. Return to an inner union with God, with yourself, which electronic man seems to need and is looking for in this way.
Jane Austen, of all people, has quite a big comment on that inside-outside. She said that people go outside to be alone just to prove their inner resources, that they don't need people. We can make it alone. And that the Romantic movement was based upon this psychic development. Jane Austen has quite a bit to say about that, of all people. I was amazed to come across it in her work a few months ago. But there's another American writer, Hawthorne, who regarded this American habit of going outside to be alone as an undermining of democracy. He said, this is sheer aristocracy. This is putting on the aristocratic thing, and it is going to undermine our whole democracy. So Hawthorne regarded it with great alarm. The moralist, by the way, is always a person who never studies effects so much as studies the content of situations. Studies the figure and not the ground. This, I think, is of great concern to advertisers who are here tonight in some numbers. Advertisers tend to study figure and not the ground. They tend to count noses rather than to estimate the pressures under the noses. The form of gnosis.
Do we have an advertiser who would like to pick that up, or we haven't heard from one? No? In the centre there.
My question is a little bit about advertising, and it changes the course of the conversation slightly, and it's a serious question, Professor. If the world had not discovered your great thinking and your writing, how would you go about creating a demand for it? What would be your advertising campaign? What would be the gist of it? And what section of the media would you use?
I put people on. I put them on. Putting people on means teasing them, challenging them, upsetting them, befuddling them. Any comic puts on his audience by hurting them. You can't name a comic who doesn't put on his public by hurting them. The technique of putting people on, in my case, consists simply in pointing to the things they have ignored, the things that concern them very nearly, but have been totally pushed aside as insignificant. A put on is a sort of situation that I study a good deal.
Can advertisers use it to effect?
Advertising is, to a large degree, put on, yes, and there has to be a certain comic element in the good advertising. Comic is always the registration of a grievance. The funny man is the man with a grievance, whether it's W.C. Fields or Rabelais.
What's the grievance of an advertiser? What kind of grievance would it be? Obviously, it could vary, but
the grievance, of course, is you're not buying my product. And
I suppose, yeah.
Very simple.
See it in a new light. Yes, in the glasses this time.
Does the fact that Professor Bronowski's book, The Ascent of Man, the fact that it was on the bestseller list in America for month after month, is that a victory for advertising and marketing, or is that a victory for Professor Bronowski's ideals and the message he was trying to get across?
I didn't see his shows, and of course, The Ascent of Man is a popular cliche, also very nostalgic, since that is not necessarily the way things are going. But no, I know that the bestseller is a mysterious thing that is mainly created. It's not a spontaneous thing. Publishers have methods for creating bestsellers at any time they have to. And it means investing a good deal of money in a book. Now, his program had many millions of dollars invested in it, quite apart from the book. So a big $1 million program or multi-million-dollar program automatically guarantees a bestseller status for the book of the show.
In the second bracket, yeah.
Professor, getting back to your rear-view mirror syndrome and your new definition of it tonight, shouldn't we, some of us, especially politicians, be looking in that same rear-view mirror to see what carnage is being left behind?
Well, in the case of politics, it's not too difficult to see what's being left behind. Which parties are up and which are down. But one of the peculiar things about the effects of media on politics is that parties and policies become very unimportant, and the image of the politician takes on a tremendous new importance. This is television, at least. And radio politics are a completely different form. Radio politics are completely different message. But TV politics do not permit very much interest in the policy or the party. But the individual candidate must have charisma. Now, charisma means looking like a lot of other people. That is my technical analysis of the problem. Now, poor Mr. Richard Nixon looked only like Richard Nixon. He was sunk. He had no charisma at all. And to look like a lot of other people means acceptable people, interesting people. Jimmy Carter, looks like the all-American Southern boy, Huck Finn, in the White House. He's a big archetype. Whereas Jack Kennedy looked like the all-American boy of the more the Bostonian variety of the successful, pushy, and aggressive boy. Carter, the Southern boy, is not aggressive, whimsical, Huck Finn style. First time that Deep South boy ever entered the American White House. So the Civil War is over.
Did you see Richard Nixon's programs with David Frost?
Yes, I did. I was amazed.
I was going to ask you, how do you think Richard Nixon came out?
I thought this is the first time in human history that a major actor in history played himself.
I'm glad I asked you. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Comments about the power of the nature of the electric media, to say that it would be a waste of time for the regulatory authorities to concern themselves with the content of television and radio. If it's a wrong interpretation, what particular things do you think they ought to be thinking about controlling?
I would hate to regulate the thoughts of any bureaucracy, but the tendency of any medium is to attract to itself types of content which are consistent with its limits. And so in the long run, it's just as people get the government they deserve, so the medium gets the content it deserves. And there has to be some sort of interplay, some sort of harmony between these things. And I would point to the fact that TV is primarily concerned with complex processes. And the kinds of content that best serve it are complicated processes. Radio is far more a package medium, far more concerned with the definite and wrapped up message and package. It's a hot medium. And whereas TV, with its cool or involving character, is much less able to cope with packages and much more concerned with processes. And so if you watch the even Sesame Street, you will see this grotesque character peeping out at you. It's the processes at Sesame Street is made by advertising men. And they understand, they have learned the nature of this medium very thoroughly. And it is very much a teddy bear, tactile, playful medium, and very dramatic one. Yes.
I was disappointed that Professor McLuhan's address didn't confront more serious technological issues, nuclear energy in particular, and I'd like to ask him if he'd agree that nuclear energy represents mass suicide, the ultimate expression of the death wish, or more in line with his terminology, the last-ditch fight to the death of the left hemisphere world of the military-industrial complex. And he claims that the world is moving towards the
sorry, look, we really can't hear very clearly. And secondly, do you think you could relate it a little bit more to the mainstream that we've been talking about? Don't exclude it, but just...
Professor McLuhan claims that the world...
No, we've heard that.
No, this is the second part of it. He claims the world is moving towards the software world of the brain's right hemisphere. But the other side now seems to have such an upper hand in terms of big money and media control that I'm curious to know how he thinks they're going to lose.
Thank you. It's a whole bundle of questions there. But the main development in these electric media is the loss of private identity. Mass man means man as related to all other men simultaneously. So the nuclear world is a kind of rip-off as far as private identity and private values and goals are concerned. And just how that relates to the atom bomb and so on, it would take a little while to develop. But these forms have a kind of inner logic, an inner dynamic which can be traced and which can be discerned and patterned and recognized.
Yes, right at the back. Farthest person, that's right, yes, you're right.
Professor McLuhan, I'd like to ask you, do you think that media will always be commercially based? And if it will always be commercially based, do you see it getting any more responsible or otherwise?
I appreciate the issues you raised, but the commercial sponsor of the media is naturally more sensitive to the audience than anybody. The commercial sponsor is going to demand a kind of rapport between his investment and the show, which will ensure a great deal of popularity and representativeness to the show. If you can think of a sponsor or who ignores the audience, maybe the CBC in Canada.
So that means
a big bureaucratic organization which feels it's quite above the needs of the audience. And so it creates a great many unpopular shows. I wouldn't say they're especially interesting. They're just unpopular. And to what extent the BBC is in the same boat, I don't know, but you might be able to comment.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to have to sneak off and have a pee.
Professor, you were talking earlier about how the new brain research has opened up new avenues in perception, about the left hemisphere being more towards the logical aspects and the right towards the intuitive. Can you enlarge on the parallel you use between how this is related to the Eastern and Western cultures?
Yes. The people of the West developed their visual point of view and their acuity of vision along with Euclidean geometry. No other country in the world ever had Euclidean geometry except the country of the phonetic alphabet. Without phonetic alphabet, you don't have Euclidean space. There's no Euclid in the Orient. Neither is there any individual identity, private identity in the Orient. But the kinds of left and right hemisphere things correspond pretty well to East and West, since the lineal nature of the left hemisphere is very visual. Visual space is the only space that is lineal and connected. Acoustic space is not lineal or connected. Acoustic space is a sphere who we hear from all directions at once. Acoustic space is a sphere whose center is everywhere and whose margin is nowhere. That is a simultaneous sound which creates that kind of space. It is the space of the sound bubble in rock music. But right hemisphere is simultaneous acoustic, and this is very favorable to the corporate identity of Oriental man. People who play it by ear. As opposed to those people who have a strong bias of point of view and who play it by the eye and by logical connected estimates, bottom line, quantity, and so on. This is all left hemisphere. But the right hemisphere has no bottom line and is interested only in quality, not in quantity. And so the otherworldliness, the non-worldly Orient, with its interest in the way of life rather than in the amount of product. You might say Polynesia. Various attempts have been made to organize the Polynesians into dynamic producers of this or that, and they remain completely indifferent to such performance. They're very acoustically oriented people, very right hemisphere. But the right and left hemispheres affect both of us to some degree. It's not just a plain either or. We use both hemispheres to some degree, but in some cultures, the one or the other gets much stress, much play.
Professor McLuhan, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our message, if not the end of our medium. Thank you very much for talking with us tonight.
So that sums up then our larger interview with Marshall McLuhan. Guys, I told you, I know people are loving listening to McLuhan in the chat. If you guys have a particular topic that he's talked about, I can find more videos while we're all here. There was one that I wanted to share. I really like the search for violence, violence as a way in which to find one's identity. So let me pull that one up, and we'll check that one out next.
In the early 50s, you predicted that the world was becoming a global village.
We're going back into the bicameral mind, which is tribal, collective, without any individual consciousness.
But it seems, Dr. McLuhan, that this tribal world is not friendly.
Oh, no. Tribal people, one of their main kinds of sport is sort of butchering each other. It's a full-time sport in tribal societies.
But I had some ideas. We got global and tribal. We were going to become...
The closer you get together, the more you like each other.
Yeah.
There's no evidence of that in any situation that we've ever heard of. That when people get close together, they get more and more savagely impatient with each other.
Well, why is that? Because of the nature of man, or
his tolerance is tested in those narrow circumstances very much. Village people aren't that much in love with each other. And the global village is a place of very arduous interfaces and very abrasive situations.
Do you see any pattern of this in, for example, the desires of Quebec to separate?
I should think that they are feeling very abrasive about the English community and about the way the American South felt about the Yankee North 100 years ago.
And is this distancing, is this going to be a pattern right around the world?
Apparently, separatisms are very frequent all over the globe at the present time. Every country in the world is loaded with regionalistic, nationalistic little groups.
But in Quebec, for example, they define it as the quest for identity.
Yes, all forms of violence are a quest for identity. When you live out on the frontier, you have no identity. You're a nobody. Therefore, you get very tough. You have to prove that you are somebody. And so you become very violent. And so identity is always accompanied by violence. This seems paradoxical to you? That ordinary people find the need for violence as they lose their identities. So it's only the threat to people's identity that makes them violence. Terrorists, hijackers, these are people minus identity. They are determined to make it somehow, to get coverage, to get noticed.
And all this is somehow an effect of the electronic age?
Oh, no. But people in all times have been this way. Mm-hmm. But in our time, when things happen very quickly, there's very little time to adjust to new situations at the speed of light. There's very little time to get accustomed to anything. One of the big violence makers of our century has been radio. Hitler was entirely a radio man. And a tribal man.
And what does television do then to that tribal man?
Well, I don't think Hitler would have lasted long on TV. Like Senator Joe McCarthy, he would have looked foolish. He was a very hot character. And like Nixon, made a very bad image on television. He was far too hot a character. Much better on radio or on the movies. Not bad on the movies, which would take quite hot characters. But Nixon was hopeless on TV.
The investigations now of the CIA and the FBI and even our own, God forbid, RCMP, has this anything to do with the electronic age?
Well, yes, because we now have the means to keep everybody under surveillance. No matter what part of the world they're in, we can put them under surveillance. It has become one of the main occupations of mankind, just watching other people and keeping a record of their goings-on.
And invading privacy.
Invading privacy, in fact, just ignoring it. It's everybody has become porous. They got the light and the messages go right through us. As, by the way, at this moment,
right,
we are on the air, and on the air we do not have any physical body. When you're on the telephone or on radio or on TV, you don't have a physical body. You're just an image on the air. When you don't have a physical body, you're a discarnate being. You have a very different relation to the world around you. And this, I think, has been one of the big effects of the electric age. It has deprived people, really, of their private identity.
So that's what this is doing to me?
Yes. Everybody tends to merge his identity with other people at the speed of light. It's called being mass man. By the way, one of the big marks of the loss of identity is nostalgia. And so revivals on all hands in every phase of life today. Revivals of clothing, of dances, of music, of shows, of everything. We live by the revival. It tells us who we are or were.
Do you feel that the fact that you and I have enjoyed the rewards of literacy, that we are more protected against television than...
Yes, I think you get a certain immunity. Just as you get a certain immunity from booze by literacy. The literate man can carry his liquor, the tribal man cannot. That's why in the Muslim world or in the native world, you cannot, booze is impossible. It's the demon rum. However, literacy also, though, makes us very accessible to ideas and propaganda. The literate man is the natural sucker for propaganda. You cannot propagandize a native. You can sell him rum and trinkets, but you cannot sell him ideas. Therefore, propaganda is our Achilles heel. It's our weak point. We will buy anything if it's got a good hard sell tied to it.
What now, briefly, is this thing called media ecology?
It means arranging various media to help each other so they won't cancel each other out, to buttress one medium with another. You might say, for example, that radio is a bigger help to literacy than television. Mm-hmm. But television might be a very wonderful aid to teaching languages. And so you can do some things on some media that you cannot do on others. And therefore, if you watch the whole field, you can prevent this waste that comes by one canceling the other out.
In 15 seconds, I've got one question for you. How much television do you watch?
Whenever I get a chance. Not too often.
I love that. So I also have another one that I wanted to share with you guys. This is from 1975. This is just an excerpt. Let's get ready to play it. This is just an excerpt from a lecture that he gave at York University, and it's on men and media. Again, this is 1975, the one we're going to watch now. So check this out.
I'd like to mention an aspect of media which I've been working on a good deal lately. And I have a preface to a new book which begins, all of man's artifacts of language, of laws, of ideas, hypotheses, tools, clothing, computers, all of these are extensions of our physical bodies. Hans Haas, in The Human Animal, sees this human power to create additional organs as an enormity from the evolutionary standpoint, an advance laden with unfathomable consequences. The laws of the media are observations on the operation and effects of human artifacts on man and society, since, as Hans Haas further notes, a human artifact is not merely an implement for working upon something, but an extension of our body effected by artificial additional organs, to which, to a greater or lesser degree, we owe our civilization. One thing overlooked by Hans Haas is the absence of biological or psychological means of coping with the effects of our own technical ingenuity in creating new organs. The problem is clearly indicated in some simians in man's presumptuous brain, when he says that when, about 500,000 years ago, man began slowly to embark upon the road to cultural advance, an entirely new situation arose. The use of implements and the control of fire introduced artifacts of which the cortex could avail itself for purposes of living. These artifacts had no relationship whatever to the organization of the body and could therefore not be integrated into the functioning of the brainstem. What Simians is saying is that our natural responses to media and to technology are irrelevant, that we cannot trust our instincts or our natural physical responses to new things. They will destroy us. How are we to bypass or offset the merely physical response to new technology and new environments created by new technologies? This problem has not been raised by anybody, except that we have to live with it every day. Edgar Allan Poe has a story called The Descent into the Maelstrom, which had tremendous influence in the 19th century on the poets and symbolists like Baudelaire and Flaubert and others. In The Descent into the Maelstrom, Poe imagines the situation in which a sailor who has gone out on a fishing expedition is caught by not watching the turn of the tide in a huge maelstrom or whirlpool, and he sees that his boat will be sucked down into this thing. He begins to study the action of the storm. He observes that some things disappear and some things reappear. By studying the things that reappear, to which he attaches himself to one of these, he saves himself. Pattern recognition in the midst of a huge, overwhelming, destructive force is the way out of the maelstrom. The huge vortices of energy created by our media present us with similar possibilities of evasion of consequences of destruction. By studying the pattern of the effects of this huge vortex of energy in which we're involved, it may be possible to program a strategy of evasion and survival. The survival cannot be trusted to natural response or natural instinct, since the brain stem is not provided with any means of responding to man-made environments. I'm going to read a passage from Anthony Storr in The Human Aggression, in which he observes, "It is obviously true that most bomber pilots are no better, no worse than other men. The majority of them, given a can of petrol and told to pour it over a child of 3 and ignite it, would probably disobey the order. Yet put a decent man in an aeroplane a few hundred feet above a village, and he will kill without compunction, drop high explosives, inflict appalling pain and injury on men, women, and children. The distance between him and the people he's bombing make them into an impersonal target, no longer human beings like himself with whom he can identify." This is characteristic situation. That bomber pilot is really very much like the person introducing any new technology, using ordinary human business resources and existing institutional means. None of these people ever consider what will be the impact or the effect of what they do when they pull that trigger. Quite apart from the use of weaponry at a distance, there is the effect of changes in man himself which result from using his own devices to create environments of service. Any new service environment, such as that created by railways or motor cars or telegraph or radio, deeply modify the very nature and image of the people who use them. Radical changes of identity happening in very sudden brief intervals of time have proved more deadly and destructive to human values than were wars fought with hardware weapons. In the electric age, the alteration of human identity by new service environments of information have left whole populations without personal or community values to a degree that far exceeds the effects of food and fuel and energy shortages. It is hoped that many improvements on this approach will be suggested by the readers of this book. Meantime, I suggest it possible to begin by noticing A, what does the artifact amplify or enhance in the case of any new form of medium or technology? A, what does it enhance? B, what does it obsolesce? And third, what does it bring back from a distant past that was unexpectedly scrapped earlier? And finally, what does it flip into when pushed to the full limit of its power? I'll give you a few examples of this pattern of these 4 phases or stages in the development of any artifact whatever. I just have in front of me, in isolation from other things, camera. A, it enhances by its snapshotting aggression and private power over people. B, it obsolesces privacy. It retrieves the past as present. It brings back the big game hunter. Bringing him home alive means bringing people home alive. Photographic journalism is very big game hunting. It flips into the public domain. The clock amplifies work. Until clock, what we call work was almost impossible to organize. It obsolesces leisure. It retrieves history as art form by fixed chronology, a measurable sequential chronology capable of visual time as measured by the clock. It reverses when pushed all the way into the eternal present, a nowness. Electric media in general amplify information range, scope, pushing information into a service environment by simultaneity, obsolesces the visual, the connected, the logical, the rational, retrieves the subliminal, audile, tactile dialogue involvement, brings back, or rather, reverses, finally, all hardware into software.
So good. Aren't these so insightful? It's incredible. It's so incredible to just sit and listen to. So this is the clip I wanted.
From the auditorium of the Edinburgh School of Communications of the University of Penn.
And so there's plenty of lectures for you guys online that you guys can find of McLuhan. They're so good. But at least now you'll have a total framework for his ideas. So when you listen to him, there's not going to be such a drastic hurdle to understand what he's talking about, which is often the case. That's why think about many of the theories he's putting forth. And he's putting them in the 60s, right? He's talking about things that we can understand as social media using, technological loving, computer obsessed people in the 21st century, but he's speaking in the mid 20th century. And to most people, they couldn't even conceptualize what the future is he was talking about. Yet what's so phenomenal is how he clearly saw it. When you read his books, and so this is something you guys can tell me if you want in the chat. This is what I have getting ready to play is my last clip of McLuhan himself. I do have a small clip of Terence McKenna, who of course, we're not promoting on this YouTube channel, but he had a long lecture on Finnegan's Wake and Marshall McLuhan. Obviously, those two are tied. Finnegan's Wake, the work of Joyce, but he has a section in that long lecture reading McLuhan from the Gutenberg Galaxy, and I have that. If you guys want to hear that, again, that's an option. So in the stream, while we play this next clip, this last clip of McLuhan, let me know if you want me to play that Terence McKenna clip. If not, we can get out of here. But I love listening to McLuhan. I'm sure you guys do too, and you're probably surprised, like, how did I not know this guy? He is so insightful. He's Christian. He's one of the top intellectuals of the 1960s. He was on public television all the time. People couldn't get enough of him in the 60s, and yet most people have no idea he existed. They've never heard his ideas. And yet when you hear his ideas, they literally connect so many dots. It's like intellectual LSD. That's what I told Annie before she came. Shout out to Annie in the chat. I said, prepare. Tonight's going to be like intellectual LSD. It's so wild. So here is the last clip I have of McLuhan. And this was of what I was talking about, where he's literally just sitting in a chair on a stage in an auditorium, just taking questions from any direction. Doesn't matter who it is. And you could see, think of like contemporary public intellectuals, like your Sam Harris or your Jordan Peterson or your Neil deGrasse Tyson, or just think of any sort of public forum for a public intellectual, and the limit of questions, the number of topics, like everything. Like if you go to a Peterson lecture back when he was, a couple years ago when he was prominent, he was in Indianapolis. So at the time, me and my girlfriend went and we watched, and he would screen all the questions, so you'd have to text it to this machine, and then they could see all the questions. Then he would just choose certain ones to answer. But McLuhan, he's just sitting there. He's just taking on everybody. Any question, any topic. I just love it. And it shows how confident he was as an intellectual too.
Yes. Why shouldn't I? Any reason why not?
Have you ever taken LSD?
No. I've thought about it. I've talked with many people who have taken it, and I have read Finnegan's Wake aloud at a time when takers of LSD said that is just like LSD. So I've begun to feel that LSD may just be the lazy man's form of Finnegan's Wake.
You said that bad news was indispensable to newspapers. Is the same thing true for television?
Well, it's like saying if TV is a cool medium, then you can't use it for hot jobs. Like the Vietnam War is a hot war, it won't go on TV. It's the first war ever, a hot shooting war ever shown on a cool medium. The cool medium involves the whole audience so deeply they find war unbearable. Show the same war on movie, on press, photography, and so on, people won't feel too badly about it. But on TV, they really feel it. They're involved for the first time. And so LBJ is making a great big mistake in trying to have a hot war on a cool medium.
What should Canada do to be taken more seriously in the world?
When you say what should Canada do to be taken more seriously,
I think we're very lucky to be a backward country. At a time like this, the less involved, the less hot, the less you are in the midst of the big events, surely the better off you are. No, I think it's a great asset. Also, when you are out of the main swim, as it were, you have a much better opportunity of seeing what's going on. Canadians have a tremendous opportunity to observe what's really happening in the world. I think Canada has the opportunity of taking the entire world as show business, rather than as a serious and dreadful happening. You know, why not? Why shouldn't Canadians accept the world as a happening and as show business?
What do you think Marshall McLuhan ought to do if he wants to be taken more seriously in the world today?
Marshall McLuhan is taken far too seriously. I certainly wouldn't do anything to increase that.
Marshall McLuhan, you say TV has turned the world into a global village. Am I right? Will it turn us all into global village idiots?
Again, there are worse fates. An idiot means a very private person. That's a Greek word, meaning a very private person. I'm losing my idiot status steadily. I'm becoming less and less private. I would much rather be an idiot. The book, in this picture, the assumption was made that the book was the source and cause of all idiotism, all individuality, and that the new media will turn us all into collective automata robots. This is a rather simple-minded idea. I mean, Truffaut and Bradbury together had cooked up something that's not very convincing. They are certainly true that the book has had an enormous amount to do with creating individuality, and the more people become individuals, the more they become competitive, and the more they compete, the more they become alike. It's true that competition has, and repeatability has tended to create a great sameness. And you can see that cool media don't always have that effect. There may be more individuality coming out of cool media.
You've been quoted as saying that you don't necessarily agree with everything that you say.
I have no point of view. As for example, now, see, I couldn't possibly have a point of view. I'm just moving around and picking up information from many directions. No, a point of view means a static fixed position, and you can't have a static fixed position in the electric age. It's impossible to have a point of view in the electric age and have any meaning at all. You've got to be everywhere at once, whether you like it or not. You have to be participating in everything going on at the same time, and that is not a point of view.
Would it really matter if someone burned all the books in the world?
Well, I should think so. It would make quite a difference. But the possibility of recreating libraries has now become fantastically real. For example, all the books in the world can be put on a single desktop, 20 million. 20 million books can now be put open, every page, on a single desktop by microfilm. The sort of things that are happening make that picture, that Truffaut picture, look rather obsolete. They still think of books as made as bound paper objects, but in the new microfilm age, microcard age and so on, the book is taking on a totally new meaning. In the age of Xerox, the book takes on a totally new meaning. It becomes an information service. It ceases to be a package. The book is no longer a package. It's information service.
Why do you say Canada is a backward country?
Oh, I'm using that term whimsically, meaning we are born in the 19th century, we're of 19th century origin, and we stayed there. People like the Americans who've decided to try it out in the 20th century have done such a bad job we don't feel any temptation to follow them. But notice, for example, in British Columbia, they never had a 19th century. But this is also true in California. They leapfrogged out of the 18th century into the 20th, and this has great advantages. Canada, by simply hanging on to the 19th century, may be able to leapfrog out of the 20th century into the 21st century without ever having bothered with the 20th. And this, I think, might be a huge advantage. If we can only hope.
Isn't this great? Guys, we have been listening to McLuhan for now 2 hours and 48 minutes. And so it looked like, based on the opinions in the chat, we will watch the quick McKenna clip talking about Marshall McLuhan and reading an excerpt from him. So here I'm going to play just a little bit of McKenna, and I want you guys to just check it out and listen. And he's going to be reading a section from the Gutenberg Galaxy, and you'll see that there is a style to the way Marshall McLuhan writes. Like, right now we're listening to him sort of pontificate publicly, and you're like, wow, these are great. And so when you hear, and I guess I could read it, but I just knew that this clip existed online. In fact, actually, what we're getting ready to watch is from a video I made like 4 years ago. But I just want you guys to try to follow, like conceptually grasp what it is McLuhan is talking about when you hear his writings, because the depth, the way he uses words, every word means so much that it's so impactful. And so that's why I recommend getting his books. You know, the Gutenberg Galaxy, The Medium is the Message, any of them are good. I'm going to start trying to collect all of McLuhan's stuff just because I love his ideas. I love listening to him talk. But anyways, here is McKenna talking about Marshall McLuhan and reading a section, and then we will hop off after this. So this is the bit of the caboose for tonight's stream. So thank you all for being here, and check this out.
And there was something about, it was his fascination with topographical layout that also brought him into such congruence with the wake. So let me read you a section from the Gutenberg Galaxy that is both interesting to think about, or, if you can't understand it, then an interesting example of what McLuhan's style was like, and what I mean by that he was an extraordinarily demanding intellectual. He doesn't cut you much slack. This is a short section called "Only a Fraction of the History of Literacy Has Been Typographic." Till now, we have been concerned mostly with the written word as it transfers or translates the audio-tactile space of sacral, non-literate man into the visual space of civilized or literate or profane man. Once this transfer or metamorphosis occurs, we are soon in the world of books, scribal or typographic. The rest of our concern will be with books, written and printed, and the results for learning and society. From the 5th century BC to the 15th century AD, the book was a scribal product. Only 1/3 of the history of the book in the Western world has been typographic. It is not incongruous, therefore, to say, as G.S. Brett does in Psychology, Ancient and Modern, and here's the quote, "The idea that knowledge is essentially book learning seems to be a very modern view, probably derived from the medieval distinctions between clerk and layman, with additional emphasis provided by the literary character of the rather fantastic humanism of the 16th century. The original and natural idea of knowledge is that of cunning, or the possession of wits. Odysseus is the original type of thinker, a man of many ideas, who could overcome the Cyclops and achieve a significant triumph of mind over matter. Knowledge is thus a capacity for overcoming the difficulties of life and achieving success in this world." So that closes the quote. Then McLuhan comments, "Brett here specifies the natural dichotomy which the book brings into any society, in addition to the split within the individual of that society. The work of James Joyce exhibits a complex clairvoyance in these matters. His Leopold Bloom of Ulysses, a man of many ideas and many devices, is a freelance salesman. Joyce saw the parallels on one hand between the modern frontier of the verbal and the pictorial, and, on the other, between the Homeric world poised between the old sacral culture and the new profane or literate sensibility. Bloom, the newly detribalized Jew, is presented in modern Dublin, a slightly detribalized Irish world. Such a frontier is the modern world of the advertisement, congenial, therefore, to the transitional culture of Bloom. In the 17th or Ithaca episode of Ulysses, we read, "What were habitually his final meditations? Of some one sole unique advertisement to cause passers to stop in wonder, a poster novelty with all extraneous accretions excluded, reduced to its simplest and most efficient terms, not exceeding the span of casual vision and congruous with the velocity of modern life." In the books at the Wake, James S. Atherton points out, and here's Atherton's quote, "Amongst other things, Finnegan's Wake is a history of writing. We begin with writing on a bone, a pebble, a ram skin, leave them to cook in the mothering pot, and Gutenberg with his Cro-Magnon charter, tinting fats and great prime, must once for omnibus step rubric red out of the word press. The mothering pot is an allusion to alchemy. But there is some other significance connected with writing, for the next time the word appears, it is again in a context concerning improvement in systems of communication. The passage is, "All the Irish signics of her dippin' help a bit, from an Father Hogum till the Mutter Maskins. Dippin' help a bit combine the deaf and dumb alphabet signs in the air, or Irish signs, with the ups and downs of the ordinary ABC and the more pronounced up and downs of Irish Ogham writing. The mason following this must be the man of that name who invented steel pen nibs. But all I can suggest for mother is the mothering of Freemasons, which does not fit the context, although they, of course, also make signs in the air." Is that perfectly clear? Now back to McLuhan. Gutenberg, with his Cro-Magnon charter, expounds by mythic gloss the fact that writing meant the emergence of the caveman or sacral man from the audio world of simultaneous resonance into the profane world of daylight. The reference to the Masons is to the world of the bricklayer as a type of speech itself. On the second page of the Wake, Joyce is making a mosaic, an Achilles' shield, as it were, of all the themes and modes of human speech and communication. Big Meister Finnegan of the stuttering hand, Freeman's Maurer, lived in the broadest way imarginable in his rush-lit too far back for massages, before Joshuan judges had given us numbers. Joyce is, in the Wake, making his own Altamira cave drawings of the entire history of the human mind, in terms of its basic gestures and postures during all phases of human culture and technology. As his title indicates, he saw that the wake of human progress can disappear again into the night of sacral or auditory man. The fin cycle of tribal institutions can return in the electric age, but if again, then let's make it awake, or both. Joyce could see no advantage in our remaining locked up in each cultural cycle as in a trance or dream. He discovered the means of living simultaneously in all cultural modes while quite conscious. This means he cites for such self-awareness and correction of cultural bias in his kaleidoscope, This term indicates the interplay and colloidal mixture of all components of human technology as they extend our senses and shift their ratios in the social kaleidoscope of cultural clash, deor, savage, the oral or sacral, scope, the visual or profane, and civilized. So, that's his comment. Only a fraction of the history of literacy has been typographic.
So it's these kind of insights that you get from McLuhan. I know listening to, that's what, if you read McLuhan, it can be a bit dense. It's a little bit easier to hear him talk about his ideas himself. And that's why I wanted to include that very last section of McKenna. Of course, he's talking about McLuhan deconstructing Finnegan's Wake. I saw Luthien the Mortal there. He was talking some of the funny phonetics of Finnegan's Wake when McKenna was reading that. There is that, for those of you who don't know, Finnegan's Wake, it is full of these weird phrases. It's a play on language itself. It is it's a masterpiece. It's an opus. It's so dense in meaning. You have that's why McLuhan was so attracted to it. That's why he became the preeminent Joycean scholar of the Wake. That I just highlight that for those who aren't aware that this is something to actually look into. That the Wake is really, really interesting, and you can buy what are called skeleton key books that try to unpack much of the meaning and what's being hinted at. But it's actually very, very interesting stuff. So that concludes tonight's stream, an introduction into the technology prophet himself, the man, the myth, the legend, Marshall McLuhan. And so I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's stream. It was... I know I did. I wanted to share with you guys, again, Marshall McLuhan, because he's one of the intellectuals that I really like. Again, he has ideas that I disagree with, but I love the expansiveness of his perspective. One, of just how well learned and well read he was, given his devotion towards English literature, but the fact that he's looking at the effects of media themselves throughout human history is such an expansive perspective. I think that's why it's appealing to many of you guys, I know to me, because if you like the tag argument, if you like some of Dyer's apologetic methods, if you like the way we talk about Orthodox theology, that it's so expansive. And I think McLuhan offers that sort of same framework, but in regards to looking at media and technology, and the fact that he predicted social media, that he predicted the internet, that he predicted the sort of collapse in society, that he predicted the homogenization of individuals. I find it amazing. It's incredible. It's mind-blowing. And I love going back and listening to McLuhan lectures because I never know what I'm going to come across. I never know what new insight. And sometimes I hear the same thing that I hadn't heard in a while, and yet I get a totally new thought from it. And so I just personally love Marshall McLuhan. I knew many of you guys weren't going to be aware of him, so I thought, gosh, I need to do a stream of where we just listen to Marshall McLuhan the entire time, and so people can be exposed to it, and then they can look up more stuff in the future if they want. So that was tonight's stream. I did just get a super chat from Prism. Oh, he donated $25. Thank you so much, Prism. Thank you very, very much. He says, many thanks for showing us Marshall McLuhan. Never heard of him till now. Funny thing, he looks somewhat like Orwell. Yeah, he actually kind of does. I didn't think about that. But yeah, brother, no problem. Again, I wanted to share with you guys Marshall McLuhan because he's such an underrated scholar. At one time, one of the more the preeminent public intellectual in America. Of course, he was Canadian, but totally falls out of repute. Nobody hears of him anymore, right? And so I wanted to bring that forward. That was the whole goal of today's stream. So thank you, Prism. I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for your support. I truly, truly appreciate it. I also want to say that I will be streaming probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and I got a great topic for you guys. This topic I'll be streaming on next will be on the phenomenon of dunking. from Michael Jordan to online meme culture. And so I'm going to be doing a sort of critical analysis of dunking. I'm talking about basketball, and I'm going to use basketball, the sport of basketball, to really talk about life. And we're going to be talking about Michael Jordan. We're going to be talking about the rise of the play of dunking themselves, like, you know, Dr. J, Dominic Wilkins, and then how this affects our perception of sport, how this affects society. And now when we look at memes and dunking on people, this is all I'm going to tie into the same sort of cultural phenomenon. And so that is going to be either Tuesday or Wednesday. I really look forward to that. So it's going to be the phenomenon of dunking, from Michael Jordan to online meme culture. So look out for that. Hope you guys will join me. Then again, that will be Tuesday or Wednesday, most likely. So anyways, guys, thank you so very much to everybody who contributed. Thank you very much, Jimmy. Thank you, Pano. And thank you very much, Prism, for all your contributions and your support. Please smash that like. Please share this stream. And I will catch you guys in the next one. So as always, until next time, God bless.